Chapter 1025. It felt like a major event. Luo Nan recalled the information he had gathered since his meeting with Blood Demon. Putting everything else aside, just the people mentioned in the Blood Demon's words, actually, only one of them was needed. The person who provided the secret deed to Blood Demon and agreed to act as his artist was High Lord's secret deed. Even with Luo Nan's meager knowledge, he knew of this powerful extraordinary who stood at the peak of the world. If the extraordinary of Earth had to be ranked, it was impossible for this old man to fall out of the top 5, no matter how restrictive the conditions were. In comparison, Blood Demon's weight was a bit lacking. Of course, Blood Demon's words could be trusted, but they could not be completely trusted. Luo Nan would still be skeptical if he rewound the clock 5 minutes ago. The problem was that Wan Luhua, whom Blood Demon had privately invited, had appeared. This dispelled most of Luo Nan's suspicions. The remaining suspicions were merely remnants due to Luo Nan's unfamiliarity with Wan Luhua. This bit of residue was nothing. He did not recognize Wan Luhua before this, but the extraordinary itself could not be faked. Moreover, the Blood Demon would not go so far as to use such an easily exposed lie to sway him. He could ask Her Majesty Empress Wu later, or even Zhang Yingying. Since most of what Blood Demon said was true, then the matter he described was a major event that clearly exceeded the scope of personal grudges. Could Luo Nan's own body contain it? Luo Nan did not even need to think about it. He already knew the answer. Sure enough, it was easier to maintain an intimate distance with callous reality compared to a pie that would never be delivered to the mouth. Luo Nan was unable to guess the plans of High Lord's secret deed and Blood Demon for a time. He could only rely on the fragments of information he had obtained before to make a wild guess. Are you guys preparing to take advantage of the situation and make a stunning appearance? Are you guys preparing to unleash a great internal strife technique and have everyone beat each other's dog brains out? Blood Demon did not react to these words, but Wan Luhua, who appeared to be more reserved and calm to the side, coughed and laughed. Oh my! You're much cuter than the rumors say. Blood Demon did not deny it. Perhaps he was purely following along with Luo Nan's words and spouting nonsense. You might not be able to see the dog brains. Actually, we just want to poke a few pustules and expose a few scars. We want to urge everyone to treat them sooner. That's all. Luo Nan just stared at him. The Blood Demon shrugged. Fine. No matter what the situation is, only masochists and bootlickers will be satisfied in the end if they do things according to other people's rules. Blood Demon was still persuading. Everyone has their strengths and weaknesses. Everyone can learn from each other's strengths to make up for their weaknesses. We can rely on each other. This brings us back to a more fundamental question. Mr. Blood Demon, do you think I should rely on you? Can I trust you unconditionally? Blood Demon was a bit startled before he laughed. But his answer turned vague in the end. Trust itself is an illusory thing. Making a judgment in a domain you're not good at is equally illusory. Then let's find something more practical. Mrs. Wan just said that Her Majesty Empress Wu has just become a core member of the club. Is she involved in this matter? She isn't. I think so as well. Then I'll target this substantial frame of reference. Luo Nan used a very casual yet rather persuasive reason to nail this matter down. Whether it's the auction or the round table conference, I'm happy to see everyone smash tonight's impromptu agenda into smithereens. You don't need to do anything. It's the same if I do it. Everyone will be able to maintain a tacit understanding. As for whether or not we can achieve the greatest results, whether or not we can keep up with each other's tempo, that will depend on our level of tacit understanding. I believe that Mr. Blood Demon is most likely thinking the same thing. Blood Demon looked at Wan Luhua. Wan Luhua smiled without saying a word. At their level, as long as they wanted a bit of face, clinging to each other didn't exist at all. Plus, Luo Nan had pretty much pointed out the key points here. Did Blood Demon really want to pull Luo Nan into their circle? He was afraid not. Even if Blood Demon could really spout lotus flowers and break the heavens with his words, everyone was just meeting for the first time. Why should Luo Nan listen to him, believe him, and do as he said? As long as Blood Demon had the slightest bit of self-awareness, he wouldn't have such extravagant hopes. In the end, this was just a briefing before a major event. Luo Nan wasn't fooled by Blood Demon, but Blood Demon was putting on an act to the end. It was as if it was real. Blood Demon said, "All right. Brother, you have your own ideas. There's no reason for us to be stubborn. However, Master Wan has come. The conditions are complete. It shouldn't be a problem to simply join the Starry Sky Club, right? Even though this circle is a bit messy, we can enter like Wu Huang. Everyone can share some resources and information, slowly increasing friendship and trust. Isn't that good?" Of course. Luo Nan was still straightforward. Blood Demon clapped his hands. Good. We didn't get the bonus point question. But this result is more than a step ahead of our expectations. Brother, we really hit it off. Luo Nan lowered his head and laughed. However, the Blood Demon soon brought up another topic. If we really want to form a circle and form a clique, there's still a process to go through. However, before that happens, we can choose to do a few things to increase our friendship. Ha! Brother, you're already here, and Nephew Gu has acknowledged you as a member of the circle. You should make use of your connections as much as you can. Nephew Big Talker had been eating melons until he was stuffed. He always felt that he knew too much. He was frowning in distress as to how he should digest this information when he was suddenly called out. He was stunned on the spot. Blood Demon extended his hand. He didn't point at Talker. Instead, he pointed at the auction catalog page in the projection area. His words had nothing to do with it. How can we increase our friendship? We've been through the same window together. We've been through a gun together. We've been together. Ah, snatch. Blood Demon forcefully changed his words under Wan Liuhua's gaze. His smile grew more and more radiant, revealing his dense white teeth. Of course. How can you call it snatching when it comes to extraordinaries? Chapter 1026. Oh my, your skill experience has increased by leaps and bounds, hasn't it? You were able to grab hold of an opening during a transfer, and in the blink of an eye, you've hooked up with two extraordinaries. Cough cough. You're exaggerating. Luo Nan shot a glance at the two traveling companions not too far away. He decisively cut to the chase. I just wanted to ask you to notify Her Majesty Empress Wu. You don't need to worry about the boss. She came here to play support. As for whether you, the main commander, will be rash or send a wave, she doesn't care. I'm just giving you a warning as a friend. It's fine if you don't get sunk into the sea in the end. Zhang Yingying came to a realization before Luo Nan could respond. It seems that this doesn't matter. TSK. I suddenly discovered that no matter what your strategy is, you're simply a hooligan when it comes to tactics. We, the peripheral members, are in more danger than you. Luo Nan laughed. It's not that bad. If I get smashed in front of everyone, then my face will be devalued in front of my fellow comrades of the inner world. Oh. Since when did Luo Yuan start paying attention to these things? I just learned it. Those who don't pay attention will always be bullied more than those who pay attention. It doesn't matter if I'm paying attention or not. Let others know that I pay attention to this. At the very least, before they do something that I don't pay attention to, they will have to consider whether or not I pay attention to this. Luo Nan spoke a long string of tongue twisters under the influence of his feelings, directly making Zhang Yingying dizzy. He didn't talk much. He ended the call and let out a long sigh. His gaze pierced through the business jet's porthole to look at the boundless sea of clouds below. Right now, he was cutting across the central Pacific Ocean at a speed of Mach 1. 2. The date line only existed in concept. He jumped back one day and entered May 15th. However, due to the artificial division of regions, this date line had a relatively large protruding curve to the east. So as the business jet continued to head north, he would soon have to jump back to May 16th. Don't ask. Asking is convention. Asking is the rule. Even if it was an extraordinaire, if they wanted to forcefully change the date according to their own will, they would only end up with their heads and faces covered in dirt. See. These are the rules. Blood Demon seemed to possess some sort of ability to pry into people's minds. He spoke a timely sentence from the side. It was just this one sentence. Anything more would make him seem like a loose tongue. Luo Nan couldn't help but think more. Obviously, the old system carried a lot of useful and necessary things. Unless it really reached a point where it could no longer be continued, no one was willing to smash the old system into pieces and rebuild it on a blank piece of land. Had the current world reached a point where it could no longer be sustained? Apparently not. In that case, this old system had perfectly absorbed the power of the extraordinary on top of its original foundation. Its centripetal force, its degree of firmness, was much more powerful than what Luo Nan had originally imagined. At the very least, he had to be prepared. He couldn't afford to fail now. A crushing defeat like a mantis trying to stop a chariot would result in unacceptable consequences. Luo Nan was just joking with Zhang Yingying. But if the things he described really became reality, then Luo Nan would probably never have the chance to laugh again in this lifetime. This had nothing to do with whether his real body was here or whether his life was in danger. No matter what, he had to be more prepared. His gaze turned from scattered to focused, piercing straight into the clouds outside the porthole. Of course, this was just the surface. Luo Nan's transformation and operation on the mental plane was impossible to be reflected by a mere water vapor body. Blood Demon originally wanted to chat with Luo Nan about matters related to the follow-up operation, but seeing Luo Nan like this, there was no need to provoke Luo Nan's dislike. His gaze swept across the faces of the other people in the cabin. There was no need for Wan Luhua to come, but she still boarded the commercial plane. Now she had an uninvolved appearance. She wore headphones and watched the fight recording in the projection area. It was a pastime. Slightly to the side, the largest person in the cabin, Mr. Talker, who was also the owner of this business jet, was trying his best to reduce his presence. From head to toe, he was the epitome of the word restless. Blood Demon glared at him. I didn't gag your mouth, and your Uncle Luo didn't chop off your arms and legs. Just do what you need to do. Is there a need to make a fool of yourself like this? Then what in the world should I do? Talker really wanted to ask this, but he really didn't have the guts. Then again, could it be that he didn't know what he needed to do? Before Blood Demon spoke, he had long since passed on the information he needed to pass on. He had already made the arrangements he needed to make. Right now, his mind was spinning in 1,000 circles, and his mouth was mumbling incoherently. In the end, didn't he just want a promise, a protective talisman? But even if he used his stiff toes to think, it was impossible for the 3 people in the cabin to give him this. This was life. As a peripheral follower of the circle of extraordinaries, Talker normally did everything he could. He used methods like a fox borrowing the tiger's might to intimidate others, and he was able to pocket large amounts of money. But when it came to the core issues, the contradictions and entanglements between circles, between extraordinaries, and between extraordinaries, he had to be prepared to be skinned alive. He might even lose his life. This wasn't because he was a direct descendant of the bloodline of extraordinaries. Oh, perhaps the reason he was able to live until now was related to this. The experienced people who circled back and forth in the circle knew very well how to control the heat and bypass the minefield. But today's situation was different. Aside from Blood Demon, an old fox who was well versed in the rules of the circle, there was also a hot-blooded kid who didn't know anything. The worst part was that this kid had always been renowned throughout the world with the name of the humanoid infrasonic array. It was a large-scale, indiscriminate killing machine in reality. Talker didn't even feel safe in Koror base, let alone being dragged into the eye of the hurricane. This time it was really bad. Talker was in a trance, so much so that he didn't even hear someone call out to him. In the next moment, Blood Demon smashed the ashtray on the table at Talker. Of course, it was just in passing. Fortunately, Talker's face wasn't smashed into a mess. He caught it purely by instinct. His entire body shuddered and he suddenly stood up. "Uncle Blood, please instruct me." Blood Demon smiled benevolently. "Young people need to be diligent with their eyes, hands, legs, and mouth. You need to be diligent with your heart. It's your Uncle Luo calling you." Luo Nan looked over expressionlessly. On the other side, Wan Luhua was a bit dissatisfied with Talker's large movements interfering with the projection. But she just gave Talker a glance and continued to watch her fight. Talker was stared at by the three extraordinaries in a short amount of time. His entire body was about to collapse, and the resentment in his heart was flattened. He immediately put on a smiling face and carefully waited upon Luo Nan. Uncle Luo, do you have any plans?" Luo Nan went, he was organizing his words. He asked despite knowing the answer, "Are you an electromagnetic type ability user?" "Yes." Uncle Luo's eyes are like torches. Talker had been skinned alive by Luo Nan earlier, so he didn't have anything to hide. Blood Demon's mouth was chatty. This kid has a lot of tricks up his sleeve. He knows how to conduct himself. Jean Tong made him happy back then and even gave him pointers. Faced with Blood Demon, who touched on his sore spot, Talker lost even the strength to be angry. He could only maintain a stiff smile with all his strength. Luo Nan didn't have any extra thoughts. He just nodded. "No wonder. Your frame of body and soul is a bit similar. So it isn't just because you're both electromagnetic type abilities. That makes things easier." Talker's entire body felt unwell. Chapter 1027. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon, when the sun was at its highest, the sky darkened at a visible speed. Thick clouds separated the sunlight from the surface of the sea, leaving only a blurry haze of light at the boundary between the sea and the sky. Without the direct sunlight, the surroundings of the giant steel ship traveling on the ocean suddenly became much cooler. Not long after, a commercial plane pierced through the clouds, slightly calibrated in the air, and swooped down towards the giant ship. The top deck became even busier. Even from a distance of dozens of meters, one could hear the clamor over there. It was unknown whether it was the turbulence stirred up by the commercial plane or the raging sea breeze, but suddenly, a cold wind blew in his face. Yu Qi unconsciously shivered. Beside him, his son Yuzheng simply sneezed. Both of them were dressed very casually. Yu Qi was still wearing a long-sleeved jacket, while Yuzheng was only wearing a pair of beach pants. His upper body was bare, and he had a bath towel draped over him. Yuzheng had played around the swimming pool with those beautiful women who were sunbathing. In the end, he was still resentful when he was forcefully dragged back by the bodyguard. If it wasn't for that sneeze, he might have already started arguing with the bodyguard. Of course, this bodyguard wasn't old Lu, who had followed his father for more than 10 years. Instead, it was the goods that had been temporarily assigned to this luxury cruise ship. Yuzheng was already thinking about letting old Lu take action and teach this temporary worker a lesson to vent his anger. The problem was that old Lu, who had always taken care of him, was like a clay sculpture at this time. He was only a breathing tool behind his father. As for Yu Qi himself, he didn't say anything about the behavior of the temporary bodyguard. Instead, he turned around and reprimanded his son, "Look at what you're wearing. Others might not know what the situation is right now, but don't you know?" Yu Zheng was already in a bad mood. He was annoyed when he heard this. "What's wrong with me wearing this? Don't tell me you want me to come out in a hospital gown. Do you want me to lie in the ICU before you're satisfied?" Yu Qi flew into a rage and wanted to kick this unfilial son away. However, when he saw that the child's cheeks were much thinner than half a year ago, his anger was stifled in his chest. At this time, his wristband vibrated. Seeing the caller's name, Yu Qi couldn't get angry. He only reached out and pointed at Yu Zheng twice to give him a warning. Only then did he adjust his mood and connect the signal. "Qin, are you in class over there? Why are you calling? Your brother. He's fine and carefree. He was just fooling around in the pool. How would he have the time to answer your call?" The irritation in Yu Qi's heart had dissipated quite a bit after chatting a little more with the caring little cotton-padded jacket. He turned his head and took the initiative to remind Yu Zheng, "Did you miss your sister's call? What are you talking about? Are you afraid that the hospice care won't be able to catch up?" His daughter was there, so Yu Qi didn't curse out loud. However, his foot finally kicked out, causing Yu Zheng to stagger. Yu Zheng had already gotten used to it during this period of time, so he couldn't be bothered to respond. He turned his head and spoke to the temporary bodyguard who had just brought him back. "Is this how your volunteers are treated?" The temporary bodyguard responded coldly. He wore a standard black suit and sunglasses. There was nothing creative about it, and it also covered up all human reactions. Yu Zheng, on the other hand, had already begun to add to the drama. "Look, in the end, he's just a lab rat. Then don't let me out. How nice would it be to put me in a cage?" Yu Qi felt his heart ache, but his daughter, who was an ocean away, was still on the phone. It wasn't good to worry her, so he could only comfort her. "Forget it. If he doesn't want to answer, then don't answer. He's just nervous now. His whole body is twisted. In fact, Dr. Clay's technology is already very mature." Yu Qi's consciousness was a little dazed as he said these old, familiar words. Ever since Yu Zheng was diagnosed with a mutant infection on New Year's Eve last year, Yu Qi had done everything he could to bring his disappointing son back onto the normal path of life. He had used all his resources, even abandoning his family and business to bring Yu Zheng around the world to seek medical advice. But now that things had come to this, he still had to rely on these meaningless words to comfort his son. As the helmsman of a large regional pharmaceutical company, he more or less knew some information, and he did believe in Dr. Clay and his laboratory's research capabilities in the field of human mutants and treatment. It was just that ever since the era of mutants, the mutant infection itself was a dangerous peak that could collapse at any time. Not to mention, it was a critical juncture between the second and third phase. In this field, 99% of the world's people were deaf and blind. Apart from blindly believing in this kind of top-notch research institute, who else could he rely on? He couldn't let his daughter know these thoughts no matter what, so Yu Qi forcefully eased his tone. "It doesn't matter if he doesn't answer. There's still me. Do you want to see how your brother is like?" As he spoke, he didn't care whether his children agreed or not. He turned on the projector function and prepared to let the siblings meet to dilute the current terrible atmosphere. He was still adjusting the angle, but Yu Zheng's expression was already changing. He was clearly still feeling awkward. But this matter didn't depend on Yu Zheng. It didn't even depend on Yu Qi or Yu Qin. Instead, it was directly announced by the serious-looking, temporary bodyguard. "It's time for the routine physical examination." As he spoke, the temporary bodyguard directly gestured for them to go back. "Hee, the little white mouse is about to enter the cage." Yu Zheng was surprisingly cooperative this time. He sneered, turned around, and walked back. He had already walked behind the temporary bodyguard, but he turned back and patted the robust man's chest. "I'll bite open the cage and run out soon." The temporary bodyguard didn't respond at all. His expression remained indifferent as he turned around and followed behind Yu Jing. He also turned a blind eye to Yu Qi on the other side. Yu Qi watched this scene in a daze. "Dad?" Yu Qin was puzzled. "It's nothing. Your brother has to go for a physical examination. Don't worry, we'll contact each other later." Yu Qi hurriedly hung up and took 2 steps forward. He wanted to follow behind, but after a moment's thought, he let old Lu follow and take care of him first. Old Lu was a little hesitant. "Chairman. It's nothing. Little Zhang isn't that far. I'll let him come over." Yu Qi watched Yu Jing and old Lu's figures disappear from his line of sight. Only then did he find a contact number and dial it. "Smith, it's me." "Hey, York, I was just about to contact you." As an important partner of WuF Pharmaceuticals in the New World, Smith had a pretty good personal relationship with Yu Qi. He immediately called out the nickname he had given Yu Qi without permission. He couldn't hide his excitement. "Come over quickly. Come to the exhibition hall first. Today's scene is amazing." The small incident in Band City didn't affect this great trade fair. I saw a lot of big shots. They even arrived early. I originally thought that I would only be able to see these walking money and power after 20 o'clock. Yu Qi wasn't in the mood to tease people. He took a deep breath and said solemnly, "Smith, you know the current situation. I have to confirm it again." Chapter 1028. Are you sure? Smith thought for a moment and understood what Yu Qi was talking about. He smiled and said, "That's not necessary, my friend. I understand the feelings of a family member who is about to undergo surgery. Of course, what your little boy needs to prepare for isn't a simple surgery. But no matter what it is, he has to walk into the laboratory and lie on the operating table to experience it, right?" Yu Qi frowned and said, "Tonight, Smith, tonight." Smith was still smiling. "Listen to me, buddy. Make sure your child is with you first. Don't let your anxiety affect him. He's already been taken into the cage by the guard." Yu Qi blurted out, but he soon realized that he had lost his composure. He took a breath and tried to reply in a calm tone, "He's not here." "That's good." Smith remained relaxed and said, "I believe that you will return to him in the best of moods very soon. Now, you just need to understand one thing. I've emphasized it before. He's option C, buddy, let me emphasize it again. He's option C. To be exact, he's one of option C. This is very important. Do you still remember what option C is?" Yu Qi didn't reply immediately. He was listening carefully. For tonight's demonstration, Dr. Clay has made thorough preparations, including a fully restored laboratory that was flown in by air, more than 30 lab and medical staff, at least 3 demonstration plans, and twice as many backup plans. Of course, there are enough volunteers who meet all the criteria. These experimental volunteers are divided into 3 groups, A, B, and C. Each group has 3 people. Among them, Group A is in the best condition and perfectly corresponds to the existing demonstration plan. There is a 99% chance that the target for tonight's demonstration will be chosen from these people. Most importantly, tonight's demonstration only needs 1 volunteer. Unless all 3 people in Group A have problems, Group B will be used, and so on. Therefore, the probability of your child being chosen for tonight's demonstration is infinitely close to 0. In fact, asking you to come has nothing to do with the experiment itself. It's because you have a high chance of becoming a consumer or an investor in the future. Therefore, this is an invitation, a roadshow. If you think about it this way, don't you feel better? Yu Qi smiled bitterly and said, "A little. Trust me, man. Tonight, you and your child are both guests. The only difference is that the seats are different. Well, thank you, Smith. Yuchi wanted to hang up, but Smith called out to him again. York, you can't miss this opportunity. Right now, the atmosphere in the exhibition hall is very good. Let me introduce you to an important person. Maybe it will make you feel more at ease. You know, Area C12 here. Yuchi actually wanted to spend more time with his child, but Smith had already pointed out his dual identity as a consumer and investor. He gritted his teeth and sped up, wanting to meet up first. It was at this moment that another door opened automatically on one side of the long corridor. The location happened to be in the middle of Yuchi and Xiaoxing. 7 or 8 people came in from the other side of the door, all dressed in classic bodyguard attire. They were almost no different from the one who had just pushed Yujing back into the cage. In the middle of these people was a wheelchair. It was so tightly covered that it was impossible to see who was on it. When the other side saw Yuchi and Xiaoxing, they were also startled for a moment. They quickly issued orders, go back. Xiaoxing was less than 10 meters away from Yuchi. He reacted quickly and immediately shouted, "We're together." The young man wanted to go through the wall and quickly meet up with the boss. But the space in the long corridor was too limited. Xiaoxing hadn't even finished speaking when one of the bodyguards suddenly exerted force and pressed him against the wall. They twisted his joints and directly locked him up. The young man screamed. His whole face was deathly pale as if his joints were dislocated. "We're preparing to go back." Yuchi's back was cold. No matter who the other side was, he couldn't go against them at this time no matter what. But Xiaoxing was in such a state that it would be inexcusable if he didn't save him. The burly men on the other side all had a cold appearance carved from the same mold. They didn't respond to Yuchi's explanation. In fact, they hadn't stopped at all since they entered the long corridor. Yuchi and Xiaoxing were just a small accident that they had casually dealt with. Realizing this, Yuchi felt even worse in his heart. Before he could find a way to deal with it, there was another sound of the door behind him. The security door he had just passed through opened again. There was also a very unrestrained cackling sound. The so-called Society of Authority is a society that legalizes privileges. In this system, you only need to pay attention to one thing, be a model. Chapter 1029. 4 people entered through the security gate. The one chattering endlessly was a man in a flowery shirt who looked like a tourist. Aside from him, there was a muscular, dark-skinned man with clear tattoos on his face and body. There was also a petite, short-haired beauty with an elegant temperament. In addition, there was an extremely young man. He looked to be a few years younger than Yujing. The 4 people walked directly into this high-clearance area. They were different from Yuchi, who was at a loss for what to do. They were also different from the grim group of bodyguards. It was as if they were truly on a luxurious cruise ship used for pleasure. At least, some of them were like this. They even ignored the tense atmosphere in the long corridor, the unnatural people and actions, and walked straight over. The flowery shirt man continued to talk non-stop, saying some specious words. The muscular, dark-skinned man had his head lowered the entire time. The short-haired beauty had a calm expression and didn't look sideways. Only the young man swept a few glances over with some curiosity. Yuchi's gaze collided with the young man's for an instant. The young man clearly didn't feel anything, but Yuchi was different. This was because he recognized this person. In this moment, memories that he once thought had faded suddenly surged up. Half a year ago, at Aurora Cloud City, at nearly the same time as the news of Yu Zheng's mutation infection was exposed, their family unexpectedly met this young man in the elevator. Luo Nan. Being in Xia City, Yuchi more or less knew a few things about this young man. He still remembered that Luo Nan had a group of people by his side at the time. Yuchi was the youngest of the group, but he was already the core of the group without a doubt. Half a year had passed. They were separated by tens of thousands of kilometers. The circumstances were completely different, but this young man was actually like a fish in water in this inharmonious environment. The flowery shirt man's mouth didn't stop. It looked like he was preaching and teaching, but his words were clearly referring to Luo Nan as one of his kind. He was boasting about himself. Yu Qi was absent-minded once more. Even he didn't know why he was able to observe in such detail. Or was it just an illusion created by his nervous mind? But one thing was certain, the group of ruthless bodyguards in front of them suddenly shrank after a low noise. They lined up against the wall in this corridor with limited horizontal space, trying their best to make space for the four of them. Even the bodyguard who was holding Xiao Xing adjusted his posture and turned his back to the wall to show his respect. He also put one arm on Xiao Zhang's throat to prevent him from making a sound. There was no hesitation in his actions, and there were no gaps in his actions. It was as if everything he did was completely natural. Seeing this scene, Yu Qi's heart stirred. Perhaps he could ask for help. Because of the retreat of the group of bodyguards, the obstructed area looked a lot more spacious. It even exposed the wheelchair that had been tightly covered before. Sitting on it was a middle-aged white man who looked about the same age as Yu Qi. His complexion was not very good, and his skin showed an ominous iron-red color. His eyelids were half closed, and his energy was not good. He looked like he was seriously ill. It seemed like the temporary increase in authority this time was to transport patients. However, when the four of them walked over as if it was a matter of course, the person in the wheelchair actually forced his eyes open and smiled. He nodded at them as a greeting. This kind of polite and restrained behavior finally caught the attention of the four. Among the four of them, the one in the flowery shirt, who had been bragging about needing to raise their demeanor, turned his head slightly and laughed. "Jeff, you old hyena, did something happen to the charging station again? I told you a long time ago that Black Lion can't be trusted. You might as well make up your mind and let the old witch help you. If you keep this up, I'm afraid you'll be so rotten that vultures won't even bother to touch you." At first glance, the man in the flowery shirt and the man in the wheelchair seemed to be on friendly terms, but their feet didn't stop. They didn't look like they wanted to chat at all. Jeff, who was in the wheelchair, smiled but didn't say anything. After this interruption, Yu Qi choked back the words of help that were at the tip of his tongue. Seeing that the best time to ask for help had passed, the four of them passed by Xiao Xing, who was still pressed against the wall in the next moment. The young man, Luo Nan, patted the shoulder of the bodyguard who was still locking Xiao Xing. He didn't stop and just walked over. The bodyguard subconsciously loosened his grip. Only then did he remember to turn his head to look at Jeff's expression. Jeff just motioned for the surrounding bodyguards to continue pushing him forward. The group of people returned to their original tight formation. They soon walked past Yu Qi and exited through the security door that he had just entered. Yu Qi didn't dare to move during this time. Just like that, the corridor that was suddenly congested also suddenly became quiet. Only Yu Qi and Xiao Xing, who was holding his shoulder and moaning, were left within the 10-meter area. One was standing and the other was lying. His wristband vibrated once more. It should be a notification of a change in authority. Yu Qi didn't pay attention to the specific content at all. He just faintly heard the man in the flowery shirt praise, "Hey, he's got that style." Yu Qi woke up with a start. He hurried to Xiao Zhang's side and crouched down. "Don't move. Let's check for injuries first." He couldn't help but look forward as he spoke. The gold elves that Yu Qi and Smith mentioned was definitely one of them. This was not only because he and his family were always at the top of the various wealth rankings, but also because of his legendary status. Old elves spent the first half of his life in obscurity, or perhaps he lived in a sewer that normal people could not understand. Then, when he was close to 80 years old, he suddenly jumped onto the most glorious and cruel stage. Before the Third World War, he plundered the wealth of many unstable countries through various dishonorable means, magnified his ill-gotten gains 100 times through the use of war leverage and the Reconstruction economics that had a mixed reputation after the war. Of course, there were countless assassinations and anti-assassinations, subversion and anti-subversion, death and being killed. In the past 20 to 30 years, as he faded away from various highly publicized affairs, this person had really become a pure totemic symbol. Correspondingly, there was only one thing left that people in the world paid the most attention to: was he still alive? When would he die? Under the premise of not caring about the cost, to what extent could human life be extended? This was Jeff Ells, a superhuman who was said to have wandered the earth for more than 130 years. Some people even swore that he was the only person left in the world who had experienced World War II, or a wizard. Of course, there were even more people who said that the real Jeff Ells had long turned into ashes, and the legend left behind was just a gimmick that the Ells family used to maintain its legendary status. Yuichi originally had no interest in this kind of thing, until today, until now. He could not help but recall everything that had happened in the long corridor, all the information he had received, especially the mockery of the man in the flowery shirt who did not regard himself as an outsider. His mind was making absurd and terrible associations. Before he could sort out the logical chain of reasoning, or rather, before he could believe it, his body was already covered in a thin layer of cold sweat. Chapter 1030. Yuichi instinctively didn't want to continue, so he changed the topic. Aren't you going to introduce me to an important person? He did change the topic, but there seemed to be some kind of magic. The bullet that had missed the target returned to the bullseye. He subconsciously said, if it's Mr. Old Heirs, don't joke around. The thing I regret the most in my life is not rushing up, kneeling beside him, and kissing the back of his hand. Smith's words were exaggerated and sincere. And then being pressed to the ground by those black suits. Smith didn't hear the small details in his words. He just expressed it in an irrational manner. That was worth it, York. That was worth it. Mr. Old Heirs is my spiritual mentor. Maybe if he touches me, he can change my fate forever. Left or right, death or life. Yuichi moved his lips, but in the end, he didn't say anything about the scenery. He just said, I just want to know someone who can make me feel at ease now. Oh, that's right. I still remember. Forgive me for being a little excited just now. I hope Miss Bai Xinyan hasn't left yet. As he spoke, Smith led Yuichi through the exhibition area. Basically, on every large cruise ship, there was an exhibition area that displayed some works of art. They would also host some small auction activities. These exhibitions generally had limited space and resources. If they didn't have something, they would lack something. If they did, it wouldn't be a big deal. But this time, it was different in Jade Light. The exhibition area wasn't just in Area C12. In fact, Area C, which was a commercial shopping area, had been transformed into an exhibition hall. Yuichi had been here once. For areas with tens of thousands of exhibits. Of course, it was nothing compared to those large-scale trade fairs on land. But as a cruise ship that had been sailing at sea for dozens of days, the scale was already very large. There was no doubt that it was being operated as a large-scale theme. Yuichi also knew that the things on display so far were more or less special. According to Smith, these were some advanced products that hadn't been accepted by most people in time. To put it bluntly, they didn't conform to laws, conventions, or even moral norms. Yuichi felt that it was understandable. Although these exhibits were strange and different, they had a relatively unified theme. They were closely related to aberrations. Abnormality was a gray area, and there were too many things that went against traditional morality. Yuichi's WUF pharmaceutical company's main business had yet to reach this level. It was only a little related to some fields. This little bit was also the heaviest tax, and at the same time, it brought considerable profits. From this point alone, one might be able to discern some sort of direction. Of course, the people who boarded the Jade Light and stayed there until now or were currently rushing to the ship were more or less related to the distortion. They were either engaged in related industries and ran businesses in this area, or like Yu Chi, they were voluntarily or involuntarily associated with aberrations. As for Jeffrey Ells, of course, he also belonged to this group. As such a legendary tycoon, it was not surprising that he was involved in any industry. However, there was one thing that Yu Chi still could not get over. That image. He thought that if he wanted to see a similar image of Jeffrey Ells, he would have to look for it in a documentary. In fact, even in documentaries, Jeffrey Ells would not be seen at this age. It was as if time had turned back 100 years. Hey, York. I have to say. Smith could not help but continue the previous topic. On the one hand, it was because of his own emotions. On the other hand, there was indeed an atmosphere of whispering in the exhibition area that they passed through. There were not many people who actually went to see the exhibits. They gathered in groups of 3 or 4, gesturing, surprised, and whispering to each other. Although their images were different, they could be grouped together with Smith beside him. They were all people who had been run over by something incredible, had survived a disaster, or had hit the jackpot. No matter what, they were all emotional reactions. Smith also reached out and pointed to Yu Chi, letting him see the reactions of the people around him. If it's possible tonight, when I point out Jeffrey Ells to you, either you doubt your eyes, or you doubt the intelligence of the top tycoons at the scene. I don't think I'll doubt anything at that time, Yu Chi murmured. Because I'm doubting it now. He inexplicably thought of Yu Jing, his own child, and then whispered, maybe I've still underestimated the power of the distortion. Smith finally noticed Yu Chi's strange reaction. In this kind of situation, he naturally made an empathic connection. York, let me guess. What did you see? Yu Chi didn't have the energy to play guessing games. He waved his hand and directly revealed the answer. I also saw a Jeffrey, the Jeffrey in the wheelchair. Looking at Smith's widening eyes, Yu Chi spread his hands. He's in the long corridor behind us, but I'm not sure if he's the one in the documentary. Actually, I still don't understand how you guys recognized him. Smith was stunned for 2 seconds before he subconsciously replied, it's enough that someone trustworthy recognized him. Smith was stunned not only because of Yu Chi's answer, but also because he had received an excessive amount of information at the same time. Hey, look over there. Bai Xinyan, the one I want to introduce, the important person who recognized old Ells. She's looking over. Yu Chi looked up when he heard this and happened to meet the gaze that was cast over from not far away. Unsurprisingly, the person was the same as the name he heard. It was a pleasant-looking woman. However, there was something unexpected. This important person was actually wearing a white suit, giving off the air of a professional. Of course, she wasn't that strict right now. The front of her shirt was half open, revealing a dark blue shirt. She looked a little casual, but it was enough to clearly distinguish her from the surrounding businessmen and women. Yu Chi and Smith didn't know why Bai Xinyan would cast her gaze over from afar, but if they missed this opportunity, they definitely wouldn't be qualified businessmen. Therefore, Smith and Yu Chi both sped up their footsteps and took the initiative to greet her. The former began to greet her from 7 or 8 meters away. Dr. Bai, we meet again. He took a few steps forward and turned around to introduce to Yu Chi. This is Dr. Clay's most outstanding student and collaborator, Dr. Bai Xinyan. He then said to Bai Xinyan, my most capable partner in the old continent, Mr. Yu Chi, the chairman of Xia City's WUF Pharmaceuticals. If I remember correctly, you guys should be from the same hometown. Chapter 1031. Yu Chi was stunned. Smith had not mentioned this before. Whether it was the relationship between Bai Xinyan and Dr. Clay, or the fact that they were from the same hometown, Bai Xinyan took the initiative to shake his hand. Bai Xinyan took the initiative to extend her hand and shook his hand with a smile. We are indeed from the same hometown. The headquarters of WUF Pharmaceuticals is in Nader district. My father works at the nearby Ren AI hospital. We might even have a working relationship. Yuqi instantly went through all the famous doctors in Renai hospital. He had a guess in his mind, so he asked tentatively, Daydream, Professor Bai it's that old father of mine. Oh, Professor Bai is fully deserving of the title of the leader of neurology and psychotherapy. My company had a very pleasant collaboration with Professor Bai's team in the development of endocrine-targeting drugs. That was how society worked. As long as they could find a connection, both parties would naturally feel close and comfortable. After chatting with Bai Xinyan, Yuqi glanced at Smith again. He did not know if this was part of Smith's calculations. This guy might not be a good manager, but he was definitely a first-class broker. For experienced people, as long as there was an opening, it was only a matter of a few sentences to get to the point. Soon, the three of them talked about Yu Zheng. What made Yuqi feel a little relieved was that Bai Xinyan's words were very similar to Smith's. I understand how you feel, Chairman Yu. I can also guess the mental state of young people. In this world, there are very few people who can use themselves as a test subject without batting an eyelid, and even enjoy it. Yuqi did not know if it was an illusion, but he felt that Bai Xinyan was hinting at something. She continued, the physical and psychological development of young people is far from perfect. Treating them with abnormalities too early can easily lead to both physical and psychological problems. Rather than rushing them into the treatment process, it is better to spend some time building up their confidence in this method. I think Dr. Clay also considered this, which is why he placed your child in Group C. Speaking of which, with the advancement of technology and the change of society as a whole, perhaps it won't take too long before such treatment becomes popular. After that, it will be popularized. From this perspective, the nervousness of young people today may become urgency in the future. Who knows? Bai Xinyan's. Her words were brilliant. Not only did she appease Yuqi, but she also teased him subtly. If it were the Yuqi who was on the deck, it would have been fine. However, the experience he had on the corridor and the information he gained after learning about it made him feel reverence for the supernatural phenomenon that was once so close to him. For a moment, he was a little absent-minded. At this moment, Smith finally could not hold it in any longer and continued to ask, in that case, what kind of person is most suitable to carry out the aberration treatment that you mentioned, Dr. Bai? Infected by the mutation. Adults? Mature mind. Or maybe I just need determination and a corresponding reward. I mean, like Mr. Jeffrey L's. Bai Xinyan pointed it out. Smith nodded decisively. His deep-set eyes were burning with ambition and desire. Bai Xinyan shrugged. Since the 60s, old Mr. L's has been the convener of human life research, and the largest research funding provider. The theoretical lifespan of the generation after the war is as high as 120 years, which has not been fully verified yet. However, the effective working age skyrocketed to 75 years, and it is indeed his great contribution. Smith did not know whether Bai Xinyan was praising or mocking him. He could only do his best to protect his idol. Mr. L's is a pioneer, there is no doubt about that. Yes, I hope he can give a correct and promising direction. Yuqi always felt that Bai Xinyan's words had a different meaning. While he was pondering, Bai Xinyan seemed to have seen something. She raised her head and looked into the depths of the exhibition area. Suddenly, she said softly, sorry. Then, she separated from the two and walked in that direction. Before she left, she took a deep breath. What's wrong? I'm not sure. Yuqi and Smith had a meaningless conversation. They also stretched their necks to look over, but with so many booths between them, they really did not know what was going on. Smith casually said some gossip, right, about this Dr. Baisinyan. There is an identity that I did not mention before. It is said that she is the girlfriend of that young Mr. Wang. Which? Aren't you standing on that person's private property? Wang Yu. Yuqi also took a deep breath, but the shock he felt was not as direct as Jeffrey L's. Compared to the legends of old, the young and high-profile figures of power of today inevitably made people divert some of their attention to the astonishing family behind them. Of course, with Yuqi's net worth, he really did not have the qualifications to judge others. He did not have the qualifications to judge others. It was also at this time that the two finally saw something different as they followed Baisinyan's back. Actually, the two still did not see too clearly, but Yuqi caught a glimpse of a dark and muscular giant among the stream of people in the exhibition area. This giant was clearly half a head taller than the others. Yuqi's pupils contracted. He immediately recognized this person. This was one of the 4 people from Luo Nan's group of 4 that he had met in the long corridor. This person had arrived. Didn't that mean, that's right. Right now, Area C had become an exhibition area. Luo Nan and the others had come here. They probably had no other goal. Talker. Smith's reaction was a bit slower, but he clearly understood the identity of the person on the other side. Talker. The one from Koro Base. That big guy. Yuqi was truly shocked. Yuqi had heard of this name before. In fact, any multinational enterprise involved in ocean shipping would inevitably have to deal with the logistics tycoon of this area, the godfather of the underworld, Talker. The sales network of Yuqi's WUF Pharmaceuticals did not set foot in this area. However, a small portion of the pharmaceutical factory's biological raw materials purchase channels were deeply connected to the industrial chain around T-City. This formed a few intersections. Talker's identity was subtle. He was relatively mysterious. Yuqi had only heard of his name, but he had never seen him in person. However, he remembered the shipping price that was 20% higher than the market price very clearly. He also remembered that there were indeed people who were stubborn and unwilling to choose the shipping company under Talker's banner. However, the results were not all that wonderful. How could such a person be related to Luo Nan? Moreover, was there a mistake in his memory? At that time, in the corridor, among the 4 of them, it seemed like this dark and burly man's performance was the most honest. Right when he was puzzled, he saw Baisinyan's figure pass through the crowd. She was heading toward Talker. I heard that Talker and Wang Yu have a very close relationship. Ha! The gossipy Smith suddenly went mute. This was because at this moment, he clearly saw the person he had just identified as Wang Yu's girlfriend. After passing through the crowd, she reached out her hand toward Talker. A young man who looked like he was still young. She did not receive a polite response. However, in the next moment, Baisinyan naturally leaned over and took the initiative to hug the young man's arm. Yuqi spoke faintly, "Is that Mr. Wang?" Smith was stunned speechless. Things were really troublesome. "Let's go!" Smith shouted. Before he could react, Yuqi had already turned around and left quickly. Soon, he was in a jogging state. In the current hall, there were only 2 or 3 non-important people who left in a hurry. It was impossible for them to attract too much attention. Luo Nan shot a glance in that direction, but he soon placed his attention back on the woman who was holding his arm. The greetings had been exchanged, but that didn't mean that he had accepted her. Luo Nan and Baisinyan were basically in a state of enmity ever since the 2000th young Miss incident. If Baisinyan hadn't cooperated with him a few times, intentionally or unintentionally, and covered for him a few times, the two barely managed to form a tacit understanding. Luo Nan wasn't sure what Baisinyan would have done when their bodies touched. However, he also suspected that Baisinyan had guessed his current attitude. That was why she had appeared here in broad daylight. Otherwise, she would have been like the 2000s incident. She would have run away without a trace. This could be considered confidence. Was she holding on to Luo Nan's confidence? Your courage is commendable. Luo Nan gave a word of praise, expressing his appreciation for Bai Xinyan's actions. But he had no intention of introducing her to the other three. The problem was that there was no need for him to introduce her. Blood Demon whistled. Oh my! Isn't this the black-hearted beauty who tricked Jin Tong to death? Bai Xinyan bowed slightly. Mr. Blood Demon must be joking. In the next moment, she took the initiative to speak to Wan Luhua. Instructor Wan, the first quarter's subsidy allocation will be transferred to you in about a week. I'll have to trouble you to take care of it. Wan Luhua had clearly dealt with Bai Xinyan more than once. Your turnover is getting more and more procrastinating. After all, this is the first wave of burners retiring from the army. The unexpected product changes have caused a large discrepancy with the budget. Plus, there are quite a few independent directors. Their heads are in a terrible mess due to the production line switching. It's hard to avoid a bit of a fuss. Even Talker and Bai Xinyan exchanged glances as they spoke. Luo Nan was a bit surprised. He didn't expect that Bai Xinyan was really famous in the inner world. All right. Her connections in the inner world were much deeper than Luo Nan's at first glance. This indirectly proved one thing. The power behind Bai Xinyan was quite impressive. At the very least, it was on the level of being acknowledged by extraordinaries like Blood Demon and Wan Luhua. From this point of view, she had her value. The reason why Luo Nan was able to face Bai Xinyan with relative calmness wasn't simply because of Mr. Bai. Rather, this was a tool. If others could use him, then he should be able to play a hand or two. Chapter 1033. Blood Demon displayed his ability as a supporting character. What do you mean? Only humans can recognize things like distortion. Only then can there be so-called collections, processing, and cutting-edge concepts. Only when applied to humans does it have real meaning. You can say that. Luo Nan's gaze swept across the groups of people in the exhibition hall. Many people had been studying the ship with curiosity and scrutiny even earlier. Luo Nan was disinclined to pay attention to them. He just said, the ship is a bit empty right now. It shouldn't be enough to cover the relevant fields. Will it increase? Empty. Blood Demon looked around. There were only 6 hours left until the auction at 8 o'clock in the evening. Some important auction items had already been arranged, and people began to fill the exhibition hall. Even if it wasn't to the point of being overflowing with people, it couldn't be associated with the word empty. Right now, the Jade Light has a total of 4,821 people, including the crew. I've checked the data. This cruise ship can carry over 15,000 people at full capacity. That's not even a third of it. Okay, it really is quite empty. Blood Demon shrugged. This is the data from Wang Yu's 30th birthday carnival a few years ago. The number of people on the ship exceeded 10,000. This is the first and only time. Bai Xinyan was still holding on to Luo Nan's arm. She spoke the name of her rumored boyfriend in a calm and natural manner. This is a private cruise ship, and it's specially prepared for large-scale luxury parties. It's basically not used for business purposes. Of course, the more space is wasted, the better. Almost 5,000 people is quite a lot. Plus, there will be some important people and their attendants coming later. If I had to make an estimate, it would be around 6,000 people. Really? Luo Nan didn't continue on this topic. He looked straight at Bai Xinyan for the first time. You know who I'm coming for. Bai Xinyan pointed her arm forward. The collection auction item area is this way. The venue has already been set up. Someone who didn't know better would think that Luo Nan was the owner behind the scenes of this auction. Blood Demon immediately gave him a thumbs up, but Luo Nan clearly wasn't in the mood to joke around. He just stared at Bai Xinyan until Bai Xinyan nodded. It was set up not long ago. Some of the installations need to be debugged. After all, this is the largest of all the auction items. Once it's installed, it won't move again until the auction ends. Bai Xinyan also looked like she was reporting work. For the sake of convenience, the entire booth is placed on the elevator. This is to facilitate the flow of the auction. Luo Nan and the others entered a relatively spacious area under Bai Xinyan's guidance as they spoke. The so-called spaciousness was only relative. There were actually quite a lot of people here, but compared to other areas, it seemed like there were more people working here. They were scattered in this nearly 200 square meters area, surrounding the central booth for various configurations. Luo Nan's eyes swept all around him. Rather than calling these people equipment debugging personnel, it would be better to call them lighting engineers and the like. The work under his hands consisted of light stands, projectors, AR equipment. At the back of the booth, there was an obvious holographic projection space, as well as auxiliary equipment. What a mess. This was what Luo Nan thought, and this was what he said. Are they trying to enhance the visual effect? Blood Demon returned to the scene for the first time and asked with great interest. That's right. Bai Xinyan's answer was frank and direct. The relevant equipment is too specialized, and it's hard to reproduce the research object. Plus, they've been left in use for many years. They're far too old, and their appearance and selling points aren't particularly outstanding. So they need to be packaged. At the very least, we need to let people know what these equipment are used for. Luo Nan concluded in a timely manner. His tone sounded calmer and calmer. At the same time, he stepped forward, bypassing the rather messy visual equipment, and climbed up the booth. The entire booth was shaped like a long arc. Luo Nan, who had once been to the 70-format laboratory, could tell with a single glance that the booth's flat body was an imitation of the laboratory's main layout. However, the two wings were spread out a bit more. This was most likely for the sake of carrying out a symbolic restoration of the commissary corridors on both sides. The problem was that the originally picturesque crab-like layout of the laboratory had become a nondescript small semicircle due to the limitations of the spatial layout. There were 6 or 7 people pacing back and forth on the booth right now. Most of them were separated by a safe distance, carefully observing the equipment that had already been installed. Some of them were even taking pictures and videos. There were also people whispering amongst themselves. They seemed to be conducting some sort of evaluation. The arrival of Luo Nan and the others caused the free activity space of the booth to become narrow. Luo Nan didn't care about this. He walked straight to the front of the center of the booth. This was the best observation point. It didn't matter if it was the original laboratory or the current transformation imitation exhibition area. Of course, there were people at this point. Luo Nan just ignored them. The person in front heard the noise behind him. He turned his head and saw that Luo Nan was about to collide with him. He originally wanted to berate Luo Nan, but his scalp went numb when he met Luo Nan's gaze. He didn't know why, but his legs crossed and he staggered to the side. This person saw Luo Nan's face clearly at this time. His face turned white with a swish. Bai Xinyan gave Luo Nan an introduction in a very considerate manner. This is Dr. Song Ken from the Deep Blue Laboratory's Western Pacific Ocean Observation Center. Luo Nan completely ignored Bai Xinyan's introduction. After the figure flashed out of his front line of vision, Luo Nan completely ignored it. He just cast his gaze calmly towards the equipment on the booth. He also cast his gaze towards the back of the equipment. There was a projection area that was still empty for the time being. Luo Nan's behavior was seriously lacking in manners. But the original group of people on the booth, Dr. Song Ken, were mostly connected to the inner world. So they recognized Luo Nan. They just didn't expect that the main character would actually come this early. They didn't dare to have any objections. Dr. Song Ken was a relatively simple researcher. He didn't have any extraordinary powers. He nearly had a heart attack when he suddenly saw this face that was labeled as the most dangerous face in the laboratory. He clutched his chest and wanted to run away, but his legs went soft. He was unable to move. Blood Demon walked forward at this time. He stood side by side with Luo Nan. He asked despite knowing the answer, "How is it? Do you feel a bit emotional?" Luo Nan didn't respond. This continued for about 10 seconds before he slowly swung his head and swept his gaze across the two areas of the booth. Blood Demon was actually the gaze of everyone on the booth. They unconsciously followed Luo Nan's gaze. But it didn't take long before the hearts of a few people who knew the situation more or less jumped. The old equipment arranged along the top of the circular arc could be considered to have been cleaned up. Or perhaps it was so clean that everything could be seen with a single glance. There was nothing but equipment here. Blood Demon had confidently pointed out the split-page notebook. There was no trace of it at all. Blood Demon's eyelids twitched twice. He heard Luo Nan whisper at this time, unsightly. Chapter 1034. Luo Nan didn't need Blood Demon to play the supporting role. He continued to speak, his voice growing louder and louder. The function of the equipment itself, the environment that carries the equipment, the object of research, and the direction of research. If any two of the above four were done well, the current situation wouldn't be like this. Blood Demon laughed in the end. My boy, your focus is a bit on that. There's nothing I can do about it. Sometimes, people's thoughts are very laughable. Luo Nan's old and experienced way of speaking was a bit comical. However, he was most likely aware of this. Soon, he jabbed his own chest with his finger. For example, me. The gazes of practically everyone on the stage were focused on Luo Nan. They looked at Luo Nan's sudden internal monologue. After receiving the invitation from the Jadeite light ship, I've always had a thought in my mind. The people on this ship are all going against me. They are participating in the auction and bidding around my grandfather's laboratory. They are undoubtedly mocking me. At the very least, they are accomplices of my enemies. In the end, I came here to fight with these people. Of course, this is also an opportunity for me to catch them all in one fell swoop. Some people's eyelids twitched. Some people whistled. The former was like Song Kansas. The latter was like Blood Demon. Blood Demon was conscious of his own perspective once more. He chuckled and followed up, that scene was quite dramatic. What was the reason that caused you to change your mind, my boy? Blood Demon's raised eyebrows weren't a hint at all. Instead, they were a clear indication. Luo Nan believed that as long as Blood Demon's following answer was even the slightest bit related, Blood Demon would dare to shout nonsense like, I'm saving the world. Luo Nan's response to this was, who said I changed? Ha! Well, I should say that there was a period of time in between when I wanted to change. Mr. Blood Demon, your interpretation is quite convincing. But when I came to the ship and walked here, I feel that. Luo Nan furrowed his brows. He spent a bit of time to organize his words. If I want to forcefully distort my sense of beauty in order to coexist with these people in this world, then I should either close my eyes or wash away the world I see before my eyes. All right. Since Luo Nan's language ability was lacking, his way of speaking appeared to be a bit of a chinibu. It matched with his age. However, among all the people present, who would simply treat such words as chinibu words to deal with them, the Blood Demon glanced at the equipment on the booths again and subconsciously touched his cheeks. Is it really that bad? I'm starting to doubt my own aesthetic judgment. What's bad about it? Wan Luhua took the initiative to ask with great interest. human. Luo Nan's answer was even more concise, and it was even more unexpected. Let's just say half. At least not long ago, he regarded human as one of the 5 internal organs. His gaze moved from Bai Xinyan's face to Dr. Song Khan's. Then, he swept his gaze over the other people at the booth. The people standing in front of these instruments on this poorly restored exhibition stand should be pure researchers and explorers. Now what these people are thinking. Emotions, desires, inclinations. I don't approve of the things that have been accumulated. Bai Xinyan's expression was natural, but the faces of those below the doctor's level were hard to describe. Blood Demon scratched his head a bit at Luo Nan's reaction. I didn't get the feeling that you, brother, have moral cleanliness when we were chatting. Or are you just a bit emotional? In fact, not many people on Earth can achieve such a harsh standard. Not really. Even if you have different thoughts and selfish motives when faced with a complex and profound research subject, you don't have the energy to think about these messy things. When you are faced with a sandstorm evolved from shattered fragments of space and time, a sandstorm that could corrode buildings, lives, and even the space and time that holds you. If you want to find valuable things in this maze, how can you do it without the harshest of concentration? Blood Demon blinked. He wasn't sure if Luo Nan wanted to tell him something, or if Luo Nan was intentionally revealing something, or if he was declaring something. Or if Luo Nan was simply venting his emotions because of the exhibition stand or the notebook. Luo Nan was far too unstable in this state. It was far too hard to grasp. Blood Demon was suddenly unable to feel Luo Nan's pulse. Luo Nan turned around at this time. He turned from facing the equipment to face the chaotic flow of people in the exhibition hall. The special atmosphere on this side of the exhibition stand was actually quite eye-catching. Many people strolling around the exhibition hall cast their gazes over. Some of them recognized Luo Nan. Some of them recognized Blood Demon, Wan Luhua, and some others. So much so that a circle of people unwittingly gathered around them. All sorts of gazes were cast over. Luo Nan met the concentrated fire of these complicated gazes. He suddenly asked, these should be the people who support related research and consume the results of research. The first to answer was actually Bai Xinyan. All the participants on this ship represent practically 90% of the distortion industrial system. From upstream to downstream, from capital to scientific research, from production to consumption. They cover everything. Luo Nan's lips twitched. Is that so? These people are the ones who have the closest contact with distortion. They are the ones who trace it back to its source. Looking at it as a whole, looking at it from the current situation, they are truly rotten to the core. Rotten skeletal frames. Rotten mental structures. Rotten desires driven. Rotten tendencies of thought. If I'm not mistaken, 99% of the people here won't delve deeply into the distortion itself. They just hope to obtain money, satisfy their desire for power, or perhaps stay young forever. Blood Demon felt that Luo Nan's description was quite consistent with his previous description and criticism of the old system. He wanted to strike the iron while it was hot and pull Luo Nan's thoughts. But he never expected Luo Nan to take the initiative to turn his face. Mr. Blood Demon, I remember you saying that, judging things as they are, is the most extreme way of thinking. I did say that. I also said that a mature system must avoid excessive polishing of individual links. Oftentimes, individuals full of flaws are the precondition for a system to take shape. Luo Nan had said all the right and wrong things. Even with Blood Demon's mouth, he actually found it a bit difficult to continue. He and Wan Luhua locked gazes. Even though they were quite familiar with each other, they were unable to completely decipher each other's emotions and reactions. It was just like how they deciphered Luo Nan right now. But the current Luo Nan had already sorted out the entire clue and theme through these garrulous descriptions and his unique way of thinking. We can view the distortion industrial system as a system. We can tolerate its low conception, tolerate its many flaws, tolerate its slow progress. But we cannot tolerate its rigidity and lack of vitality. Blood Demon finally grasped the opportunity to intervene. You feel that there isn't enough vitality inside. Luo Nan's face was expressionless. No. It's the opposite. Although the majority of the people here have a messy body and soul frame, and their desires and thoughts are nauseating, it is qualified to be a living system. It can even be said to be full of vigor and vitality, with limitless potential. I'm just saying that when you clearly know what kind of environment the flies and maggots will be most active in, you will at least do your best to stay as far away from that place as possible. You will bring along all the things you believe to be the most precious. So, let's hurry up and resolve the problem here. Chapter 1035. The proper business Luo Nan was talking about was undoubtedly the split-page notebook. He asked Blood Demon directly, "Your information is correct, right? It's impossible for it to be wrong. As for the situation, let's ask." Blood Demon turned to ask Song Kan, "Hey, was there a notebook here before?" Song Kan shook his head subconsciously. TSK. Blood Demon pursed his lips when he didn't get the answer he was hoping for. He looked at Luo Nan again, but Luo Nan didn't seem to be happy or angry. The Blood Demon blinked and suddenly clapped his hands. "This is a good thing. Those who should be here are not here. Doesn't it mean that the value of my information is maximized? Perhaps you can say that." Luo Nan actually agreed to this point. At this moment, Luo Nan and Blood Demon had a tacit understanding. He understood what the Blood Demon meant. Let's assume that Blood Demon's information was correct without a doubt. The special notebook from the 70 format had indeed been brought onto the Jadeite light, and it had indeed been used to tease Luo Nan. Then, with its ambiguous identity in the auction catalog and its ambiguous identity in the photo album, if it was placed openly on the stage, it would be obvious that it was an auction item. Things would be troublesome, and they would have to go through a lot of trouble. And in this current situation, it didn't matter if they wanted to give Luo Nan a surprise attack, or if there was an oversight in the arrangements, or if the auction house simply didn't take this seriously at all. On a legal level, things were becoming simpler. All he had to do was let the dust settle before the notebook was placed on the stand. Of course, the premise for such an assumption was that the Blood Demon's information was reliable. Blood Demon was quite confident in this. He even winked at Luo Nan. "Aren't you going to raise the pay a bit? If you agree, I'll get another pattern from Old Man's secret deed for you." Luo Nan didn't pay any attention to him. He just stood there quietly, a bit lost in thought. At least in the eyes of others, this was correct. The Blood Demon did not think much of it. Instead, he rubbed his fists and said, "I didn't expect that we would have to deduce at the very beginning. Come on, let's go through the situation. Tacker, you wouldn't make a low-level mistake with this list, would you?" Uncle Shua. Tacker's dark face looked a little awkward. He subconsciously turned his head away, his eyes wandering. In every corner of the exhibition hall, a large number of surveillance devices were installed. Perhaps, it should be said that it was certain that the people and events on the exhibition stage were all being observed and evaluated by certain important figures. He had been forcefully pulled into the group, and this was something that could be easily explained. However, if he was too active, did he really think that the other side wouldn't let him off easily? We can just find them by ourselves. A few steps and a few words. This is a necessary social interaction. It's much more reliable than your hypothesis. Luo Nan persisted, "It's a few steps and a few words per person, right? If we watch the recording, it might only take a few minutes." Blood Demon sighed, "Brother, this is high-level intelligence from a secret channel. If I release it in public, I'll offend people. Aren't you selling me out? Luo Nan's true body wasn't here. Some things were more troublesome. Things like watching a recording lacked a built-in playback device, so it could only be played outside. It wasn't that Blood Demon didn't let it go before, but how could it be the same in a street cafe that was so far away from each other and a scene that was so closely related? Really? Luo Nan was very astonished. I thought that accompanying me to the booth was already a clear enough stance. Now it looks like the tolerance of a true God is more outstanding than I imagined. Or perhaps, the level of tacit understanding is higher. How could that be? Kids these days were far too sensitive. Blood Demon spread his hands under Wan Liuhua's gaze that was like a smile that wasn't a smile. If you want to watch, then watch. Even if I'm a good person, I'll do it all the way. Blood Demon's words were mostly to raise the price in a pitiful manner. He was quite straightforward when it came to doing things. Soon, the secret recording that had been played before was displayed once more on this booth. It naturally attracted the gazes of many people. Luo Nan didn't care about the external influence caused by the recording. He stared at the area of dim light and shadow that couldn't be considered particularly clear. A few seconds later, he suddenly asked, "Tell me. Where was it at that time?" Chapter 1036. Luo Nan's gaze slid from the center of the arcing distributed equipment to the two sides. The left side, the right side, a few rounds. He had raised a question before, but the direction was unclear. There were even fewer people who could follow his train of thought, so no one had responded for the time being. Luo Nan didn't mind. He himself was organizing his train of thought. He muttered to himself, "It's definitely not the main central laboratory. Then, is it the left claw corridor or the right claw corridor? Is it the front or the back?" Blood Demon looked over with a subtle gaze. The gazes of the others were more or less the same. Luo Nan's words more or less revealed a few things. And vice versa. These things weren't important. Luo Nan stared at the unclear video in front of him. He felt that Blood Demon's playback method was a bit conservative. Make it bigger. Do your best to restore it. Blood Demon rolled his eyes, but he still adjusted the size of the video according to Luo Nan's words. He restored it to the size of a human. Limited by the quality of the video, the entire image inevitably became more blurry. At first glance, it looked like a group of ghostly shadows flipping on the display stage. The people who saw the video for the first time really couldn't figure it out for a while. Blood Demon continued to advise, "Most of the time, it's better to use your mouth than your brain. Thinking is better than socializing. If you want to find radiation from this, you might as well directly ask the content provider." Blood Demon turned to ask Bai Xinyan as he spoke, "What's his name again?" "He's the provider of this equipment." "Horn Demon, right? Is he here yet?" Bai Xinyan smiled and shook her head, I'm not sure." During this short conversation, quite a few of the surrounding visitors and staff members tiptoed over. Some even came over. Some even asked the people on this side, causing a buzzing noise. Luo Nan still didn't care. From his perspective, according to the Toyama auction house's rotten nature, this video would most likely be played at the auction. Otherwise, how would they raise the starting price? Since they were all watching it, there was no difference between watching it earlier and later. Besides, he might be the one who watched the video the least compared to the people standing on the display stage. "Where do you think it is?" Luo Nan asked Bai Xinyan this time. He highly suspected that Bai Xinyan was the type of person who watched the video a lot. Bai Xinyan had been leaning against Luo Nan this entire time. She clearly felt the meaning behind Luo Nan's words and subconsciously moved away. She observed Luo Nan's expression. In the end, she smiled and shook her head. "I don't see it." He did not get an answer twice in a row. Luo Nan memorized the number, but he didn't continue to pursue the matter. It seemed that he was studying this video, and he became entranced once more. Some even stopped their original activities and looked around, but some were still immersed in the established rhythm of hiding, hunting, and eating. Next to a small freshwater lake, a similar situation was occurring on a large scale. As the only open-air water source within dozens of square kilometers, all kinds of creatures filled up almost every ecological niche around the freshwater lake, forming a visible food chain. The creatures were either careful, cold, alert, or ignorant. On the whole, it was still a natural chaos. At the corner of the small lake, a brown bear that had clearly shown a state of abnormality was there, gorging itself. And the wild donkey herd that had just lost a member regrouped dozens of meters away from the bear, sticking close to the surface of the lake to absorb water again. This could be considered the harmony of nature. However, in this realm of nature, there were still some elements that deviated from the whole. The most typical example was the hairless monkey that was wrapped in a sturdy fiber and preferred to walk on two legs instead of crawling on all fours. But because it was missing its right forelimb, it could not crawl on all fours. At this moment, this hairless monkey was similar to the mutated brown bear. It had just killed a wild donkey, and it was somewhat awkward as it used one hand to press down on the prey and tear it apart to obtain nutrients from the fresh meat. Other than that, it did not care about anything else. If that was all, it would only be a slight incongruity. The problem was that this hairless monkey was changing. There was some unusual squirming on the surface of its body, undulating against the fiber fabric that was wrapped around it. At the same time, there was a rustling sound coming from it. Especially as the clouds in the sky thickened and the sky darkened, there was light swimming and flickering under the layer of clothing, vaguely forming a chain that formed a net. Chapter 1037. The hairless monkey didn't care about this change. In fact, with his current muddle-headed state, he was only focused on the prey beneath him. Eating was all he had to do at the moment. However, his eating process was also distorted due to the abnormality. At first, he used his teeth to bite his prey, but at some point in time, all his teeth fell off one by one. That wasn't all. They also fell off. To be more precise, they were separated. There were also the muscles that his mouth needed to move. Before that, there was still the mask that covered his face. Soon, his entire face, including all his facial organs, was separated. At first, the parts that fell off were still barely connected by blood vessels and nerves. But after a few breaths, these connections also fell apart. Later, even the bones that were pieced together to form the skull were disassembled along the bone gaps, and air leaked out from all sides. But this person didn't notice it at all. This was because even though his entire head had been disassembled, and even his brain, which was barely a whole, began to distort, confuse, and churn as it squirmed, he still maintained a basic system framework. However, what kept these disassembled human body parts together was no longer the original life system that was made up of blood vessels, nerves, skin, flesh, and bones. Instead, they were thread-like, faintly discernible, semi-illusory lines. They resonated with the chains of light that moved on his body, like electric currents that pierced through the air in a special environment. These semi-illusory, electric lines seemed to have some kind of magnetic force, and they could carry out complex exchanges of energy and information. Under their restraint, the head of the hairless monkey that had fallen apart was still a system that continued to operate. Even though the way it operated was completely different from that of a normal creature. There was no doubt that some unimaginable power was being used. At the same time, some information hidden deep within the head was being steadily transmitted out through a powerful replacement system. The feeding was still going on, but as the main body of systematic behavior, the hairless monkeys no longer relied on chewing. Instead, They pierced the remains of their prey through the electric lines, and transmitted the strange power over, turning the relatively intact wild donkey carcass into minced meat that was 100 times finer than the skull that had been dismembered earlier. Then, the fragments that were broken down later were absorbed by the alien head, which had broken down a step earlier but still maintained its system. It could be said that it had gone through a deeper fusion. It could also be considered as eating. If they didn't care about their sense of belonging, this way of eating was obviously more efficient than the natural and primitive digestive system. It looked cleaner, and there were almost no leftovers. However, from a visual point of view, such a scene was a little too extreme. The creatures scattered on this side of the lake were more or less affected. Not far away, the mutated brown bear stopped eating and retreated with its prey, letting out a low snoring sound from its throat. It seemed to be a warning, but it was more to give himself courage. But to the hairless monkey that had just finished eating, it didn't mean much. By the time it finished eating, the head, which had long since changed beyond recognition, actually began to converge inwards under the effects of the electric lines. Countless parts of its original body, regardless of whether or not it still maintained its basic structure, and regardless of what its original biological structure was, were casually pieced together. In short, its nose wasn't a nose, and its eyes weren't eyes. It was more like a lump of mud mixed together from different waste materials. There was no lack of bone rubbing and penetrating, and it was common to see nerves and blood vessels fluttering and nodding in the air. There was no need to even mention the situation where the epidermal tissues were rubbed together. But this kind of phenomenon didn't persist for too long. This complicated and bizarre system clearly possessed some sort of memory, aside from disintegration and stitching. The enormous and ugly lump of flesh and mud miraculously recovered its original appearance after 2 or 3 rounds of rubbing. It was restored to the hairless monkey, which was the face of a normal human. During this entire process, the monkey absorbed enough energy to sustain itself, but it also exposed a few things during the continuous disintegration and churning. It was then projected tens of thousands of kilometers away. Being able to restore itself is really dog shit luck. Luo Nan opened his eyes and muttered in a low voice, but it seems that this really is the first. What's the first? Blood Demon's ears were sharp. He heard what Luo Nan said, but he wasn't able to understand what Luo Nan was referring to. After all, it corresponded to a distant real-time image deep in the hinterland of the old continent. It also involved Luo Nan's exclusive thoughts. Luo Nan didn't respond, but his originally gloomy brows relaxed a bit. In a certain sense, Luo Nan's soul cloak was like a satellite hack in a real-time strategy game. It dispelled the fog of war within the scope of the Earth, bringing him convenience that exceeded his imagination. However, the evil poison pollution that was accidentally brought out from the relay station brought enormous damage to the soul cloak and even to Luo Nan's entire system structure on the mental plane. It also caused the fog of war to once again obscure his field of vision. There were a few pieces of good news amidst the ruins. For example, Luo Nan's believers. They used various methods to carry out deep interference effects throughout the world. They still maintained contact with him. They were like casually tossed scouting units. They passed through the fog of war and illuminated observable areas of varying sizes. The size of these observable areas was clearly proportional to the strength of the scouting units themselves. It was also closely related to Luo Nan's projected attention. The soul cloak and other structures of the mental system were slowly recovering on the basis of these scouting units. They attempted to be pieced together once more. There was one more thing besides these scouting units. As the mica structure took shape, it had a characteristic that was closely related to the water vapor environment. This caused the damaged structure of the mental system to continue its recovery process, and it became a bit entangled with the soul cloak. Luo Nan didn't see any negative things for the time being, but there were a few unexpected harvests. Indeed, Luo Nan was currently paying attention to the horned demon roaming the wastelands of the old continent. This horn demon was originally a tool that Luo Nan had unearthed from the special power of the magneto-optical mica in the offline testing scene. He forcefully controlled and twisted it into a tool. Luo Nan had an additional origin with the embryonic form of the mica structure. Back then, Luo Nan had only used him as a carrier and fulcrum to clash with a true god. Luo Nan didn't expect this tool to actually produce an additional effect at this time. The thick cloud structure formed by the interweaving of the mica and the soul cloak around the horn demon seemed to have been stimulated by some sort of stirring. It became exceptionally lively. On the other hand, the analysis of the horn demon's messed-up body and soul frame was exceptionally sharp and efficient. This wasn't just reflected in the excavation of the horn demon's memories. It was an extremely ideal reference model. At the very least, Luo Nan had used the mica to dissociate tens of thousands of living beings from last night until now. None of them were as complete as the horn demon. Originally, it was just a seed that was casually planted into the soil. Now, it was giving birth to a pleasantly surprised sprout. Alright, it was quite awkward to give the horn demon such a position. And now wasn't the best time to do experiments. In any case, whether it was the mica or the horn demon, they both had a set of basic behavior that could maintain and continue their existence even though they didn't have self-awareness. Right now, the mica was still in the initial stages of self-proliferation and evolution. There was still an unknown distance between it and the true magneto-optical mica. It was also limited by the broken state of the soul cloak, so it was unable to rapidly expand. It was unknown where this support came from, but there was also a sense of ancientness and vicissitudes that were like ruins. So much so that the occasional sparks of electricity from the damaged equipment below the stage could be used as supporting elements to set off. It was like a surreal painting that had been erased of rationality. Chapter 1038. In the middle section of the relatively intact booth, Blood Demon stepped on the steel plate under his feet. He felt the shaking sensation as if it could collapse at any moment. He rubbed his chin. To collapse or not to collapse? That's the question. What do you think? Wan Luhua had the standard standing posture of standing like a pine. In fact, through her extremely sharp senses, she was actually doing the same thing as Blood Demon. The booth under her feet had become a very interesting research object. However, Wan Luhua never said anything irresponsible. She calmly said, "This isn't my area of expertise. But no matter how I look at it, this effect is our doing, isn't it?" Blood Demon's finger swiped across the torn and distorted equipment display area in front of him. Just as he said, this kind of strength method that could cut through metal and forcibly shift positions was the specialty of the fleshly adepts. It must be known that 90% of the booth was made of metal, and the total weight was several tons or more. To achieve such an effect in an instant would be difficult even if professional equipment was moved over. In other words, the fleshly adepts, who far exceeded the limits of the human body, possessed such an ability in theory. You're overthinking it. You don't have this sense of design. I can't stop them from collapsing either. In front of an expert, any quibbling was meaningless. Blood Demon admitted it directly. However, continuing with the previous question, he still found it difficult to make the corresponding judgment of value. Should I say this is a clever move or a stupid move? Just as they had discussed, the key to the scene presented by the current booth was not about tearing or destruction. Instead, it was about the sense of design. The entire steel structure of the booth had been torn to pieces. If one followed the normal laws of physics, this place should have long collapsed into a complete mess. One wouldn't even be able to find a place to stand. However, the reality was that the equipment used in front had only shifted along with the torn and distorted booth. This shift was carried out on a rather neat surface. Of course, the most difficult thing was to achieve normalized stability after the destructive shift. If the current floor of the booth was covered with a layer of boards, people would probably never imagine that the supporting area below would already be a mess. The two transcendents by their sides could create destruction that was 10 times or even 100 times more tragic than what they were doing now. The only thing lacking was this neat and tidy sense of design. It would probably require them to put in thousands or even tens of thousands of times more effort. How could he do it? This was because Luo Nan didn't directly destroy and tear apart the structure of matter to create displacement. On the contrary, Wan Luhua asked with interest, "So, have you found your inspiration yet?" "Yeah, I'm still looking." No matter how well Blood Demon did his work in the early stages, no matter how much he understood Luo Nan, he couldn't help but roll his eyes at this time. Wan Luhua responded with a smile. "No rush. There's plenty of time." Luo Nan felt the kindness in her words. Though he didn't quite understand where it came from, he still responded with a smile. Actually, Luo Nan's train of thought was quite clear by now. The information from the Horned Demon's memories gave him the most direct direction. Actually, this point was also reflected in the recording. He just wanted to make it clear. At this time, the recording restarted once again. It reached the stage where a certain person flipped through the pages quickly. A close-up shot of the notebook's title page was shown on the screen. Luo Nan didn't continue watching. He exhaled softly and lowered his head. Soon, the surrounding people heard a wave of soft murmurs. The murmurs came from Luo Nan's mouth. They had a certain rhythm, rising and falling, cycling back and forth. The murmurs were far too vague. Most people couldn't hear the contents clearly. Of course, this didn't include the two extraordinaries. Whether it was Blood Demon or Wan Luhua, they both possessed perception and discernment abilities that surpassed ordinary people. Therefore, they could hear the murmurs clearly. The murmurs were short sentences that were like rhymes. They were divided into 4 paragraphs, and the contents were, the gazes of the two moved away from Luo Nan's face. They looked to the side and forward. In the recording, the notebook had already been folded open. It was heated by the laser and soon caught fire. The instant the notebook caught fire, the flames charred and curled up the title page. The same content appeared on the paper in the form of words. The words then turned to ash within the flames. My heart is a prison, my heart is a furnace, my heart is a mirror, my heart is a nation. Chapter 1039. There were quite a few intelligent people on the stage. Bai Xinyan was definitely one of them. Even though she did not hear the contents of Luo Nan's murmurs clearly, she was able to make some judgments as she followed the gazes of the two extraordinaries. A new call came in at this time. Bai Xinyan glanced at the caller ID and saw that it was unfamiliar. She chose to reject the call. Her thoughts were diverted, but when her attention returned to this side, she was stupefied once more. On the stage, Luo Nan's murmurs seemed to be mixed with some peculiar echoes. It sounded like the faint sound of thunder that could be heard before, but after several refractions, it became inexplicably clear once more. Bai Xinyan wanted to make a further analysis, but she saw Luo Nan raise his head. She did not know when his lips had closed. He gave a deep glance at the equipment on the stage, then he turned around and left. Anyone who saw this action would be stupefied. Completely subconsciously, Bai Xinyan strode forward to follow him. Aside from her, Blood Demon and Wan Luhua, these two extraordinaries, actually followed Luo Nan's lead. At the very least, they had curious expressions. Even Talker wore a bitter expression as he followed behind Luo Nan in silence. The people who had been watching the liveliness in the surroundings had long been scared out of their wits by the unforeseen event on the stage. They saw Luo Nan take the lead and step down, and each and every one of them hastily retreated to make a path. As for the other side of the stage, only Song Can and the others were left. They were either on the stage, below the stage, or in the cracks. Each and every one of them was dumbstruck. They did not know how to react. Tell them to stay a bit further away. Luo Nan suddenly spoke. His thoughts were jumping wildly, but his direction was still unclear. They can't blame others if they get lost in a bit. Bai Xinyan was barely able to grasp the rhythm. She turned her head to glance back and said, "The stage will be cleared. It won't collapse, right?" Ha! Blood Demon turned his head as well. He swept a few glances, then rubbed his chin thoughtfully. Luo Nan shot a glance at Bai Xinyan, not saying much. Bai Xinyan responded with a smile. She followed Luo Nan very closely, but at this moment, she certainly couldn't hug him anymore. She just forced herself to walk side by side with Luo Nan and tilted her head to look at his profile. In the end, Bai Xinyan didn't have the ability to peer into people's hearts. All she could see in her eyes was Luo Nan's gentle facial contours. His gaze was probably looking straight ahead, and his pursed lips possessed a bit of maturity and rigidity. Luo Nan was able to relate to the current situation. Many of these had been damaged by the childish fine hair on the corners of the young man's lips and cheeks. It was pretty much universally recognized by all sorts of research. Luo Nan's physical development had been tempered by drugs that affected his nervous system for many years. There were also a few other factors that interfered with his growth. Luo Nan's growth was slower than that of his peers. This was reflected in his height, hair, voice-changing period, and even his personality. From a traditional physiological and psychological perspective, this was a sensitive child who was in the rebellious phase and could explode at any time. Of course, if an ordinary rebellious child wanted to explode, he could totally slap them. But for Luo Nan, for this psychic expert who possessed inhumanly powerful strength, the so-called explosive point was not the least bit exaggerated. Perhaps the earth would explode with a single slap. And from Bai Xinyan's perspective, the most dangerous thing about Luo Nan was that he had obtained his profound theoretical system from who knows where. It could be said to be complete and self-consistent. He had his own view and judgment of the external world. Moreover, he could turn the unfathomable thoughts in his mind into reality in a matter of minutes. He didn't need external help. This caused Luo Nan's way of doing things to completely break away from the traditional model. It made people unable to predict and dispel. There were many times when everyone was still suspicious, but the situation had already intensified to an irreparable stage. Just like right now. Bai Xinyan could already smell the scent of losing control. Every step she took seemed to intensify the drumbeat of the curtain being drawn. But she had no way to deal with this. Why do I have to think of a way? Bai Xinyan laughed self-mockingly. She adjusted her breathing a bit, thinking about adjusting her mood before making a plan. And at this time, she suddenly noticed that quite a few people in the audience, who were making way for them, were reacting strangely. The attention of the audience was somewhat diverted, especially to the area where the group of people had already passed. Some people were inexplicably sizing up all around. Some were even tapping their ears. There were also some who were whispering. Bai Xinyan could hear a bit. For example, the echo is too loud. The stage is still collapsing. Let's stay a bit further away. And so on. It's a sound. When this thought became clear, Bai Xinyan's heart suddenly tightened. Yes, a sound. She turned her head to look at Luo Nan. The young man beside her was still pursing his lips. His gaze was looking straight ahead. This was clearly his first time coming here, but he had unknowingly become the leader. God knows where he would lead this group of people to. Well, the most crucial question right now was Luo Nan had clearly shut his mouth, but the surrounding air still floated with a muffled shockwave. She carefully discerned, the murmuring was still there. It even stirred up the echoes of melancholy thunder. Of course, this thunder was not really thunder. At the very least, it wasn't just thunder. It wasn't just sound waves conducted through the air. It was dark clouds that pervaded above the sea of consciousness. It was a strange creature that rubbed against the front of the antennae of consciousness. Bai Xinyan felt that it was like a sharp blade. It was like a gun barrel that was spinning in front of her forehead. Then everything became clear. Luo Nan's will vibrated in the void, generating endless echoes. Such vibrations were absolutely impossible to circulate within the exhibition hall of Area C-12. They had probably already, on the other side. Blood Demon blew a whistle. He rejoiced in Luo Nan's misfortune, as if he wished for the whole world to be in chaos. Star Shaman has said hello. He's in Area A, right? He's not there. Luo Nan's response was without rhyme or reason, but everyone around him understood. Bai Xinyan sighed soundlessly. It was very clear that with Luo Nan's actions, the entire jadeite light, from top to bottom, inside to outside, no one would be able to escape. The restless thunderclouds really were hovering above their heads. You need to be careful. With that damned witch's nature, she might borrow this disciple to get involved. It's fine as long as she hasn't, Luo Nan responded casually. He then asked, who's with him? I don't have your abilities. She didn't take the initiative. Oh, it's Connie. She said hello. Headquarters actually sent her to act as an advance party. It's her. That makes sense. Luo Nan recalled this person. She was Constance Dalei, a female extraordinary. She was known as the strongest boundary master of the inner world. The two had fought briefly in Chan City. He didn't think too much about it. He continued to sift through. There are two in Area B. They should both be fleshly bodies. They're very solid. Luo Nan's choice of words was very subtle. Next is Area C. Ha! Luo Nan paused for a moment. Then he grinned and said something unrelated. Her Majesty Empress Wu seems to be coming over. Chapter 1040. The commercial plane pierced through the clouds, continuing to correct its direction and altitude as it drew closer to the surface of the sea. Zhang Yingying looked at the scenery through the porthole from within the cabin. She mumbled casually, is there going to be thunder? The wings seemed to be charged. The commercial plane had already pierced through the thick clouds before she finished speaking. The field of view below suddenly opened up. The jadeite glow was like a small and exquisite steel box on the roaring sea surface. It was practically one with the leaden sea surface. Only the fluorescent lines on the landing platform at the top of the ship gave a rather clear indication. The commercial plane communicated with the cruise control tower and began to descend. The noise in the cabin grew louder at this time. Is the engine broken? Zhang Yingying subconsciously mentioned this and immediately spat a few times. But no matter what, the noise was there and it was getting louder. Meng Chong, who sat across from Zhang Yingying, unconsciously frowned. It's not sound waves. It's not purely. He paused for a moment and made a judgment. There's power at work on the mental plane. He's fighting with someone. The he Zhang Yingying spoke of was clearly referring to Luo Nan. Zhang Yingying furrowed her brows as she spoke. She did her best to sense the details on the mental plane. It's not the middle of winter. It's like the clouds above. There's going to be a sudden explosion of thunder. Ha! Zhang Yingying inexplicably felt a bit familiar. She moved closer to the porthole and looked outside. The cruise ship continued to approach. It seemed to grow larger and larger. The visual effect was quite astonishing under the support of relative speed. But looking at it this way, there didn't seem to be anything too out of the ordinary. It shouldn't be. Otherwise, this ship would have sunk long ago. Meng Chong did his best to find a more accurate adjective. Yeah, it's like deterrence. Zhang Yingying clapped her hands. She came to this conclusion faster than Meng Chong. It was for no other reason than the fact that she had prior experience with this. Last year on New Year's Eve, Luo Nan had played this move at Aurora Cloud City. His tyrannical will pervaded the void like a soundless thundercloud, suppressing all sides and causing chaos. Only a few months had passed. Zhang Yingying's memories were still fresh in her mind. A slight reminder triggered her memories. In the end, we still have to fight. Zhang Yingying still remembered that there were a few troublesome characters at Aurora Cloud City back then, but not many. She was on her home turf. But now, above the boundless ocean. The Abyss District is not peaceful either. Although Meng Chong was a piece of meat. Beside him, there were also no extraordinary species. She didn't go up, just tapping the scripture scroll in her hand against the palm of her other hand. It was as if she was counting a beat. She seemed to be deep in thought. Zhang Yingying and Meng Chong followed her to the front. They could not help but gasp in admiration at this warped yet neat layout. As ability users, they could not help but consider what they would do if they were in her place. What would they do in order to realize all of this? But in the end, they could only look at each other and shake their heads. How did he manage to do this? Zhang Yingying asked, not understanding. Probably. It's an ability that can continuously affect the structure of space and time. This answer was quite clear. However, the one who responded to Zhang Yingying wasn't Her Majesty Empress Wu. It was a woman's voice, but there were a few intentional or unintentional breaks in her words. There was a hissing sound between her words. It carried a mysterious and even sinister flavor. Zhang Yingying jumped in fright. She suddenly turned around and saw a woman wrapped in a wide white robe standing behind her. The woman had just lifted the hood off her head, revealing a delicate and pretty face. An explanation was an explanation, but the woman's gaze wasn't on Zhang Yingying at all. She only stared at Her Majesty Empress Wu, who had just turned around. She spoke with an exceptionally cold tone. Wu Zhao, this is the big trouble you've brought. Yeah, Connie. This is the big trouble you've stirred up. Zhang Yingying stuck out her tongue. She very consciously moved closer to Meng Chong. Without a doubt, the woman standing behind Zhang Yingying and the others was the world's top barrier grandmaster. She had a transcendent status in the Ability User Association, Lady Constance Dollar. In a sense, she was the enemy of Zhang Yingying and the others. Zhang Yingying also noticed that other than Constance, there was also a gentle-looking man who had silently arrived. He wore a casual suit. His figure was tall and straight. He could be considered handsome, and he was smiling from ear to ear. But the problem was that his face was even paler than Constance's. It had reached an unhealthy level. This caused his smile to appear somewhat sinister. Although Zhang Yingying had never seen him in person, she had seen the information. She immediately made a judgment. Star Sorcerer. There was no escaping. Chapter 1041. It seemed that these sorcery guys were all similar. Zhang Yingying had once heard from Her Majesty Empress Wu that although Constance Dalei, a female extraordinaire, had formed her own school of thought when she was young, she had been taught by the necromancer. The two of them had quite a bit of history. Now it seemed that this was indeed the case. As Death Witch's proudest disciple, the Star Shaman's relationship with Constance was obviously not ordinary. However, Zhang Yingying did not know that extraordinaires from Jade Light had entered the venue so early. After all, if not for Blood Demon's interference, they would have only arrived at 8:00 in the evening. These two had come so early. It couldn't be that they had nothing better to do and were sunbathing on the ship, right? Her Majesty Empress Wu also asked, "You came so early. Are you going to tour the exhibition hall a second time?" No. I just want to see with my own eyes the ability of big trouble to cause trouble. Star Shaman seemed to be better at socializing than Constance, so he automatically took over the conversation. Her Majesty Empress Wu glanced at him. Just go and greet him. He hasn't gone far, right? We are more interested in his work, his plastic arts. Star Shaman smiled as he spoke. When he curled his lips, he looked a little handsome, provided that his pale, almost transparent skin was ignored. It's because of this that we can endure the noise of his abyss area. We didn't know that he has a hobby of chanting scriptures in the abyss area. Chanting scriptures. Has this happened before? Her Majesty Empress Wu seemed to be asking the obvious, but Zhang Yingying thought about it seriously. I don't think so. He's already weird enough. If he chants scriptures every day, what will happen? At this point, Zhang Yingying glanced at the Buddhist scriptures in her boss's hand and stuck out her tongue again. It seemed that she had accidentally poked someone she could not afford to offend. No, it was the person who paid her salary. Her Majesty Empress Wu did not care. After all, Zhang Yingying did not truly understand what was happening in the abyss area. She tapped the scripture lightly on her palm and turned her gaze back to the exhibition table. He was already emotional, and he was egged on by Blood Demon. God knows what state he's in now. But there has to be something exciting in it. Constance stared intently at the shattered exhibition stand and replied simply, "That's right, it's not a big deal. Maybe. There's no harm in asking." The Star Shaman made a pointless suggestion. However, the gazes of the three extraordinaries turned to Song Can, who was still in a daze on the stage. Zhang Yingying blinked. An eyewitness? Where have I seen him before? The Star Sorcerer added, he should be in charge of one of the departments in the Deep Blue Laboratory. Constance recognized it too. The Western Pacific Observatory. It's the organization in charge of observing and researching the spatial interference between the Deep Blue world and Earth. Her Majesty Empress Wu smiled. I remember. When the coordinates were announced last year, it was him who recorded the explanation video. I always thought it was a secret organization. To be able to hide the exact coordinates of the Deep Blue world until last year, it's an impressive achievement. It was hard to tell whether Her Majesty Empress Wu's words were sarcasm or praise. The other two transcendents pretended not to understand. There would definitely be differences between the headquarters and the branch in the sharing and handling of some critical information. This circle would also definitely be different from that circle. There was no need to explain any of this. Song Can stopped on the display stage for a long time. He had been given quite a fright by Luo Nan before, but it wasn't to the point where he couldn't recover his wits until now. There was another reason why he stayed behind. This was because he sensed that the display stage, which seemed to be in pieces, was currently displaying a deep content that was extremely closely related to him. At the very least, it was related to the project he was in charge of. Song Can wasn't an ability user. At the very least, he wasn't an ability user in the traditional sense. However, he was able to sit in the position of the person in charge of the observation center. He was able to sense the familiar smell of intercourse in the plane of time and space within this area of approximately 100 square meters. Perhaps it wasn't as strong as the smell that appeared between the spacetime of the Deep Blue world and Earth. However, the feeling that came and went, the feeling that seemed real and illusory was simply like a beautiful dream. It made him unwilling to wake up. Therefore, he clearly knew that problems would arise if he stayed here for too long. The staff at the scene had indeed tried to clear the area and persuade him to leave, but he still persisted in bringing the researchers under him and nailing himself to the display stage. He wanted to see if he could discover more valuable clues. Right now, the most frustrating thing was that the equipment of the observation center couldn't enter. Distant yet distant, huh? Someone spoke behind him. Yes, that's the smell. Does it feel like a reflection or a link? Oh my, the word blink is used too well. Song Can clapped his hands in praise. Only then did he realize that something was wrong. He suddenly turned his head, and then he saw that a few more people had unknowingly come up to the display stage. He felt like the space on the stage that he could still stand on was filled to the brim, as if it could collapse at any time. Song Kan's first thought was to protect the scene. He subconsciously shouted, "Hey, you guys." As soon as his voice sounded, reason and a sense of danger rose from the bottom of his heart. "You guys are Madame Dollar." Song Can finally recognized one of them. He became even more flustered. He recognized Constance Doll because the gloomy and mysterious lady had often come to his observation site and the observation area of the observation site in recent years to conduct research and experiments of supernatural nature. Even if he wasn't someone from the inner world circles, he still knew how terrifying this lady was. Then he was able to distinguish that two of the people traveling with Madame Dollar were listed in the list of highly dangerous personnel. They were all big shots that he couldn't afford to offend. Song Can broke out in a cold sweat again. He had yet to think of a way to deal with this, but then he discovered that Madame Dollar didn't plan on bickering with him at all. She just placed him in the position of an eyewitness and asked him a few questions about Luo Nan's words and actions. Of course, Song Can said whatever he wanted to say. In the end, he couldn't help but ask himself, can we talk about something closer to the theme of the display stage? He thought too much, and his brain heated up. He couldn't help but ask the big shots in front of him, Mr. Luo Nan, did you use the display stage to anchor something? Her Majesty Empress Wu, Constance, and the star shaman faintly discernible exchanged glances. They were also observing each other's thoughts. In the end, the star shaman laughed and said, "Why do you say that? Can you sense it?" Song Can felt a bit regretful as soon as he spoke, but he couldn't control his rationality at this time. Whether it was the external pressure or the emotions in his heart, they all forced him to say what he wanted to say. Sense it? No, I didn't. Maybe it counts. I'm saying that this continuous phenomenon, which seems to deviate from the law of gravity and center of gravity, is very likely because there's something supporting or complementing it. It's right in front of us. At the very least, it can be verified with the results of observation. I'm talking about the past. Chapter 1042. Song Kan's mind was different from the disjointed description. The countless first-hand information he had collected in the observation center for over a decade flashed in his mind. The information was classified and stored according to a systematic standard. The observation center and the other relevant departments of the laboratory used this information to carry out all sorts of comparisons, experiments, and calculations. They generally described the mystical process of the interaction between spacetime planes. The more he saw, the more Song Can seem to possess a mystical sense. Even though many phenomena were not intuitive enough and were rather chaotic, he was still able to capture similar traces from the chaotic phenomena. He did not know whether this was experience or a supernatural ability that belonged solely to him. It's not easy to see this step. Before Song Can, the tall and slender beauty holding a scroll in her hand softly praised him. Oh, this should be Her Majesty Empress Wu, an important character in this auction. Information on this person had been released during the internal briefing. She was the same as Luo Nan. She was a character that Song Can needed to be especially careful of. Song Can felt a mountain of pressure when facing this person. However, this person's attitude was the most genial so far. Moreover, she was the one who had proposed the idea of linking. It looked like she was an expert. Song Kan's complex thoughts aside, Her Majesty Empress Wu slowly walked toward the equipment installation area with the most severe deformation after her words of praise. She only stopped to look at a certain starting point of the tear. The others did not follow, but they more or less shifted their attention in that direction. Her Majesty Empress Wu was in the rhythm of discussing problems. Do you think that the support of the other side is solid enough? Song Can blurted out, didn't you say linking before? Oh, it looks like great minds think alike. Song Can's feet felt like they were floating. Fortunately, he clenched his teeth in the end and forced himself to reply. You flatter me. Although that was what he said, the technician's emotions got to the top of his head and he started to talk again. At present, the conditions for intersecting planes have yet to be completely satisfied. There is only an interaction similar to gravity. However, this place already possesses some directivity and even regularity. Unfortunately, I don't have the equipment on hand. I have no way of measuring the concrete data. But it's hard to imagine how it is possible to bestow this property purely by relying on manpower. Song Can was certain that the booth and the equipment on the booth did not possess the corresponding feeling before Luo Nan arrived. Yes. Luo Nan endowed this place with an activity that was exclusive to the space and time. At least it was a sign. Tell me in detail. Not only Her Majesty Empress Wu, but Ms. Delay was also interested in having a deep conversation. This greatly satisfied Song Can's vanity, but at this time, he saw the subtle looks in the eyes of a few researchers nearby. His brain started to work. Just now, what did he say? What he said was all sensitive information of the observation center. If he continued, it might be leaked. Speaking of which, it might have already been leaked. For a moment, Song Can was a little confused. What should he say and what shouldn't he say? He couldn't help but fight in his heart. But before the battle was over, the expressions of the big shots in front of him all changed subtly. Looking at the direction of their gazes, it was clear that their attention had already shifted elsewhere. Song Can felt a little stifled in his chest, but it was not just an emotional impact. His chest was indeed stuffy. It was as if the air quality in the large exhibition hall had plummeted and was extremely polluted. At this time, he heard the pale-faced man click his tongue. The smell of a lion has been getting stronger and stronger over the years. Bad breath. It's hard to avoid this after eating too many corpses. Her Majesty Empress Wu waved the scroll in her hand as if she wanted to fan away the surrounding turbid air. Then she sighed, in the end, it's all troublesome. Which one? Zhang Yingying did not see any powerful characters come over. Naturally, she could not see them. This was because the target of the extraordinaries was at least half the length of the cruise away from the exhibition hall. That old fox Baiji. The Amaterasu court is leaking air from all sides. I'm afraid it's about to collapse. In a certain cabin suite in Area E of the cruise ship, a rather stout black man spat out air from between his teeth. He heavily closed the notebook in his hand and tossed it onto the desk beside him. In the end, his thick palm pressed down on the notebook's already faded and frayed skin. He forcefully crushed it twice, so much so that one could hear the friction of the paper underneath. For a moment, the man even wanted to put in more effort and crush the notebook into pieces. However, even though he was Black Lion, who was famous for his fierceness, when faced with the rigorous and dense oppressive will above the abyss area, as well as the auras of the two old acquaintances that accompanied it, other than symbolically resisting it to show that he was not afraid of anyone, it was difficult for him to make any more radical moves. After all, he was fierce. He was fierce, but he was not a hothead. The kind of young lad who would easily activate extraordinaries to attack each other really did not have the slightest bit of restraint. There was also the blood demon, the 10,000 flowing flower, fuck off. After all, when he returned to Band City, he could still see the real thing. Black Lion grinned. His dark golden teeth looked particularly ferocious in his pitch-black mouth. You, come here. Black Lion hooked his finger at a black suit, who was standing guard at the bedroom door. The latter was slightly startled, but quickly came forward. Black Lion roughly stuffed the notebook into the chest of the black suit and knocked it with his fist. Take this to the exhibition hall in Zone C12 and put it at the booth of Lab 70. If you meet anyone on the way and ask for it from you, just give it to them. No matter how well-trained the black suit was, he was a little dumbfounded when faced with such vague orders. Give it to anyone who wants it. Who else could this lousy notebook belong to? Halfway through his sentence, Black Lion was suddenly startled. He thought of some links that he had not considered before, but he had no intention of correcting them. Instead, with some curse-like evil thoughts, he grinned and revealed his black gold-sharp teeth. Not bad, you're a talent. What's your name? Forget it, Tool Man number 1. I'll do as you say. The black suit, no, Tool Man number 1, became even more confused. He wanted to ask again, but he was simply and rudely interrupted by Black Lion. Get lost. Tool Man number 1 immediately shut his mouth and turned to leave. Only then did the Black Lion get up from the overburdened chair and stretch. His thin clothes were almost about to be torn apart by his huge stomach. Black Lion was already used to this. He swaggered to the door of the bedroom and pushed it open. As an absolute VIP, the suite that Black Lion lived in was of a rather high standard. It was very spacious, and with a little tidying up, it would be fine to use it as a small exhibition hall. However, when he entered the bedroom, he suddenly felt that it was much more cramped. The reason was simple. There were too many people here, and the various connections between people were too complicated. 5 young men and women, their bodies stiff but their minds clear, were chained and placed in various positions in the room. Crisscrossing conduits extended from their bodies, forming a complex structure that resembled a spider web. In the middle of this network, Jeffrey Ells was half sitting and half lying on the luxurious bed in the room. His eyes were closed, as if he had fallen asleep. Chapter 1043. In the catheter, the dark red blood was drawn from different directions and from different people. It carried different genes and different deep-seated components. It returned to the same destination by different routes and entered a bright red sarcoma-like container, where it was mixed up. At the very least, it looked like it was stirring. It transformed into a turbid gray liquid. Then it passed through the surface of the sarcoma-like surface and extended slender tentacles. It was injected into an already opened container component below. If Luo Nan was here, he would probably feel that the special equipment component below, which was folded and relaxed according to the structure of the container, looked very familiar. This was because this was the portable workbench that he had previously used to extract medicinal ingredients. Of course, it was just a similar type. The current portable workbench was much more advanced than the ordinary one that Moya had paid for, and its functions were also much more powerful. The blood drawn from different people passed through the initial smelting of the sarcoma-like container in the middle. Then it entered the portable experimental vessel for a second extraction. It passed through the relevant instruments for testing. After confirming that there was no doubt, it was injected into Jeffrey Ayres's blood vessels. The injection of these components was like injecting life force into him. Jeffrey Ayres' rapid breathing slowly calmed down. His rusty red skin also gradually returned to normal. Correspondingly, the 5 young men and women responsible for transfusing blood to him weakened at a visible speed. The rapidly proliferating feeling of fear gave additional wear to his body and mind. Some of the girls were already in tears, but no one cared about them. Old Ayres himself was in average spirits. He was extremely tired under this abnormal state. However, he still opened his eyes when Black Lion walked to the front of the bed. He stared at him calmly, maintaining the manner he should have. Black Lion revealed a mouthful of black gold teeth. This kind of vanity is meaningless. You need to sleep. Old Ayres slowly raised his hand and gently slapped his forehead. He spoke hoarsely, another failed product. There's no need to emphasize the mistake you made. In any case, your memory function isn't reflected in this failed experimental product. Black Lion casually twisted a catheter beside him. He even used his thick finger to flick it. Right now, you can have the laboratory create another one. I heard that you recently found a collaborator. He's a gene trafficker and catalyst expert. His single cost has plummeted, right? You're talking about Luo Yuan. I don't trust him. When faced with one of his own, Old L's tone was much slower than usual. Every rise and fall of his voice seemed to require extra strength. However, this way of speaking allowed others to hear every important information in his words. Luo Yuan's ability is unique, but I don't trust the so-called ability that can't be replicated by machines, no matter how good it looks. Are you talking about me? The Black Lion grinned again. You still haven't found a machine that can replace me. Old L shook his head slightly. With the face of a strong man, he spoke the words of an old man. This is different, son. Shut up. The Black Lion changed the topic. Instead of thinking about that, why don't you think about how to appease the people in Clay's lab? Of the 6 test subjects in Group AB, if you snatched 5 of them, it would not be easy to extract enough energy from their blood to last you the entire night. Then increase it. Old L's gaze landed on the sarcoma container that was suspended in midair. Without any hesitation, he said, doesn't he still have Team C? 3 or 4 more should be enough. I can't just focus on Clay's side. No matter what, I have to give Mao Xingye some face. I still have a few big orders waiting for him. The Black Lion patted his belly. Speaking of which, Clay's side really put in some effort. The quality of these test subjects is very high. They're controlled at the critical point of the 2nd to 3rd phase transition. The nourishing power is unexpectedly pure and clear. It's indeed useful. Forget it. Let them prepare first. I'll go around the ship and see if there's anything more suitable. If it really doesn't work, I'll catch a few fish in the sea. It'll make do. However, Old L's was being stubborn here. No, there's no such thing as make do in my dictionary. Shut up. At your age, if you talk too much, the room will be filled with the smell of rotten apples. The Black Lion ignored Old L's request. He turned around and left the room. Old L's was not angry, at least on the surface. He only tried his best to widen his eyes and stared at the fat figure of the Black Lion as he left. The Black Lion's figure had nothing to do with being fit and tall, but Old L's gaze was fixed on him. It was as if he was looking at the most outstanding beauty and the most delicious food. The sound of the door opening and closing rang out. Old L's closed his eyes again and swallowed hard. After adjusting his breathing, he gave an order to his personal attendant. Wang Yong and Tu Gu. Let them come over. Instructor Wang is already on the way. As for Mr. Tu Gu, he seems to be taking a stroll on the ship. I'll contact him now. Forget it. Let him be. Old L's retracted his order, but he quickly added another one, get the rest of the experimental subjects over. Tell Clay that I approve of his experiment. But tonight, he's destined not to be the main character, so don't waste your effort. Yes, sir. The personal attendant knew that Old L's could not see him, but he still bowed respectfully and quickly went out to make arrangements. When the order from the Powerful's room was transmitted through the radio carrier, some people who had yet to receive the relevant information were still engaged in a dispute that had actually deviated from the main topic. Of course, as the supervisor in charge of the volunteers in Clay's laboratory, Bob, this half-bald, middle-aged white man, had completely lost his patience after being continuously harassed by several groups of people for a long time. I'll explain one last time. The reason why Team C can go on stage is because there's a problem with Team AB. According to the agreement, it's their turn. Bob spoke very frankly, but this matter could not be resolved with a frank attitude. Yuchi had already started slamming the table. If there's a problem with Team AB, how are you going to ensure the safety of Team C? In the face of an unstoppable force, being able to go on stage is the greatest safety. Bob also slammed the table. Fortunately, Smith kept mediating. Only then did he suppress his anger and say a few more words. For Smith's sake, Mr. Yuchi, I think you're lucky enough, especially your child. I suggest that after this matter, you can buy a Powerball bet. Perhaps it will create a rich asset that is not inferior to your current net worth. I've already revealed enough. I don't want to make trouble more troublesome. I only hope that everything will become simple. Now, let's act according to the contract. As Bob pressed the bell, black suits that resembled human weapons surged in and invited Yuchi and Smith out of his temporary office. Chapter 1044. Of course, Yuchi wasn't the only one who received this sort of temporary upgrade. In addition, the volunteers of Team AB had more or less their relatives accompanying them. It seemed that a wave had already arrived before them. But the men in black suits used violent methods to clear out Bob's temporary office and the corridor outside. They also effectively separated the parties involved. This sort of method was crude but effective. As for whether it was illegal or not, who cared? We can't count on Bob. I just tried to contact Bai Xinyan, but she didn't get through. She didn't respond to my message either. Smith glanced at the man in black, who was monitoring them, and cursed. He couldn't continue because Yuchi was staring straight at him. Yuchi's face was blue and his eyes were bloodshot. Smith had been a broker for a long time. He knew that he was facing the backlash of his clients. Even if he had a clear conscience, there was no reason to talk about this at a time like this. As for the fact that the experiment wasn't really risky, there was no need to even mention it. In the end, Yuchi was still a rational person. He knew that venting or taking out his anger was meaningless at a time like this. At this time, Yuchi's mind was also very chaotic. He even considered bringing Yuzheng along to escape from this giant ship. Fortunately, he quickly eliminated this kind of irrational fantasy. He tried to use his rationality to find an opportunity. Is there anyone else who can contact Dr. Clay directly? It would be good to have a word with him. Convince him to change people or use fewer people. Anything is fine. As long as Little Jing can escape, the sponsorship fee is negotiable. Smith nodded and didn't say much. He operated his wristband again. Yuchi wasn't idle either. He had some connections in the New World and Luoyang City. Even if those connections weren't enough, he could still go to Xia City and ask for help. Even if it didn't have any real effect, it would be good to make Dr. Clay and his experimental team hesitate for a bit. The two men could be considered rather accomplished. They stood in the corner of the corridor and madly made phone calls. But it didn't take long for reality to tell them there was always a gap between hopes. This was very normal. There was no need to involve specific people. As long as it was a problem related to the mutation infection, it was extremely sensitive and taboo. Not to mention, they were far away in the middle of the ocean. They were situated in an extremely delicate geographical and social environment. The Jade Light. Who would easily open their mouths and make a promise upon hearing the name? The other party didn't even need to refuse. Just by saying that they wanted to understand the situation, a few hours, half a day, or even an entire night would pass. Yuchi was also a sophisticated person, so he had a basic judgment of these things. The more people he contacted, the colder his heart became. It was the same for Smith. Even if he didn't feel a chill in his heart, he felt more and more awkward standing next to Yuchi. He urgently needed to come up with a decent solution, but in the end, he could only come up with something that was better than nothing. York, I think we should start with Bai Xinyan. Even though she rejected us, we know where she is. We can look for her directly, or through her father. Didn't you say that we worked together before? Daydream. At this moment, when he said this name, he felt even more awkward, but it could also be considered a path. Smith and Yu Qi were stunned. They seemed to have thought of something at the same time. The former raised his voice and asked that, what was it called again? Yu Qi did not answer. He immediately turned around and rushed to Zone C12. Smith hurried to catch up. It was probably because the increased blood circulation stimulated his brain. He recalled the name. Luonan, right? Is he sure he's still here? Yu Qi still did not speak. He just operated his wristband to confirm that he didn't have Luonan's number. He quickly switched to a different person and sent out a communication request. The target was his daughter, who was several thousand kilometers away. His mood was about to explode, but he forcefully suppressed his emotions after connecting. He became gentle and calm, even slowing down his footsteps to maintain the stability of his breathing. Qin, you're not in class, right? That's good. It's fine. Don't worry. It's fine as long as your brother torments himself. Yu Qi chatted with his daughter for a bit with absolute willpower before finally getting to the main topic. Oh right, Qin. I accidentally saw someone here just now. That's right. You know him. You mentioned him before. He's a very mysterious schoolmate. Yeah. He's the one little Jing offended. I just brushed shoulders with him and just remembered. I didn't have time to say hello. Yeah. I'm very curious as well. Why did he come here? Do you have his contact information? It's nothing. It's just too much of a coincidence to bump into him on an ocean cruise. It's good to get in touch and deepen our relationship. Dad can't miss out on such a powerful young person in Xia City. Smith spread his hands to the side. It must be said that Yu Qi's ability to control his emotions was quite decent. He was unable to hear any sense of anxiety from the tone he used to converse with his daughter. But since he was going to lie, the logic behind his words wasn't tight enough. Hopefully, the other side wouldn't be able to tell. Looking at Yu Qi's expression, he had indeed deceived his daughter. The problem was that Yu Qi's friendship with the other side didn't seem to have reached the point of exchanging numbers. Yu Qi's face was filled with unconcealable disappointment, but he quickly roused his spirits and said to the other side, "This is a rare opportunity. I remember that you're friends with his relatives. Help Dad ask." Okay, send it over in a bit. The call ended, and Yu Qi's brows furrowed even tighter. Smith saw the situation and said some nonsense, "Let's go over there first. Maybe we'll bump into him." Yu Qi didn't know what he was thinking. He was a bit absent-minded. Smith called out to him, and he woke up with a start. He tossed the little doubt that he hadn't straightened out to the back of his mind. He nodded in agreement and sped up again. Naturally, he didn't know that thousands of kilometers away, in Xia City's 6th high, his daughter had already made a decision. She dialed a number that she claimed she didn't know. On the cruise ship, which was as complicated as a maze, almost everyone had their own goal, whether it was an internal drive or an external drive. Tool Man Number 1 accepted a strange order and found the express passageway leading to Area C. He entered an elevator that was on the way. He came out in a hurry. He didn't even wrap up the hot notebook with anything to cover it. It wasn't appropriate to hold it in his hand. In the end, he did what Black Lion did and put it in his bosom. The problem was that this notebook was really hot. That wasn't a description. Tool Man Number 1 was in the outer circle of the inner world. He was certain that this notebook definitely possessed some special magic. Ever since he put it in his bosom, it had been emitting heat. It was so hot that it made one's heart wrinkle. At the same time, there was a slight vibration. Of course, it was possible that this was an illusion. In any case, it was absolutely right to get rid of such a hot item as soon as possible. Up until now, there hadn't been any strange people asking him for it. He just hoped that the elevator would hurry up and enter Area C's exhibition hall so that he could put the item in its proper place. However, the elevator was for public use. It was normal for people to get on it midway. After crossing 2 floors, the elevator door opened, and a colleague, wearing the same black suit and black sunglasses, walked in. The moment the elevator door opened, the identification device came into play. It was a real colleague. The two of them didn't have any expression. They nodded as a greeting. The newcomer stood on the other side of the car, putting some distance between them. In their line of work, being careful with their words and actions was the most important thing. If it wasn't necessary, they absolutely wouldn't inquire about each other or strike up a conversation. Silence was the most reassuring atmosphere. The problem was that Toolman No. 1's calm state of mind didn't last more than 2 seconds before it was broken. The elevator door closed and the car started moving. The colleague who came in turned to him. Chapter 1045. The colleague spoke very politely, and he had a magnetic subwoofer that made other men envious. But when these elements were combined with what he said, it made Toolman No. 1's already overheated heart almost explode. "Can I?" Toolman No. 1's body instinctively tensed up, and he almost got into a defensive posture. But at this moment, Black Lion's instructions flickered in his heart. If you meet someone on the way and ask for it, just give it to them. This order dispelled all his subjective initiative. Toolman No. 1 was stunned for half a second before he hurriedly took out the notebook from his chest and offered it with both hands. The colleague also politely received it with both hands. He rubbed it twice in his hands, as though he was inspecting the material. Then, he opened the notebook and flipped through it. Toolman No. 1 very consciously blocked out the following scene. He looked straight ahead and only stared at the panel of the elevator, as though it contained the ultimate secret to his promotion and salary increase. The elevator continued to descend, and the colleague beside him flipped through the notebook very gently and subtly. Apart from the occasional sound of paper rubbing against each other, there was no other movement. As a result, the slight noise of the maglev elevator became especially clear. This was definitely the most difficult period of Toolman No. 1's life. It was extremely long. He was already thinking about whether he should press a button midway and directly escape. Anyway, the notebook had already been given, hadn't it? However, when he had this thought, the colleague seemed to have seen through his thoughts. He still spoke gently with the magnetic subwoofer. "It won't take too long. I'll return it to you. I don't want it." No one would care about the true thoughts of a tool man. Regardless of whether the other party's attitude was firm or gentle, after this sentence, the sound of paper rubbing against each other suddenly rang out. Toolman No. 1 thought that the other party had sped up the speed of flipping pages, but he didn't expect to hear a soft sigh beside him. "What's wrong?" Puzzled, he turned his head and looked at the notebook in his colleague's hands. At the same time, a voice sounded in the car again. "Flip faster. It's best to get a general idea first." Toolman No. 1 was stunned. Why does this voice sound so familiar? No, why are his lips, teeth, and tongue moving? He shuddered violently. The sudden thought in his mind was like a firecracker, exploding his brain into chaos. The area below his neck was cold, as if he was numb from the cold and had lost all feeling. But no matter what, he still moved his lips and spoke clearly. "This is getting interesting. If it were me, I'd change the order of these loose-leaf binders." Tool No. 1's eyes were about to burst, but he couldn't see the source of the dominating power that defied his will. All he saw was that his colleague didn't even raise his head as he replied in a calm tone, "It's better to keep things as they are." Tool man number one's tongue continued to move. "When Baiji came to me, I didn't think much of it. But now, it seems like it's a waste of God's gift in your hands. Should I agree to it? Or, you can just give it to me, or hand it over to my stupid disciple." "I'm sorry, Lady Necromancer. I promised my colleague, you don't have to worry about me, don't worry about me." Tool man number one froze on the spot. His eyes were painful and hot, and he was about to cry. He really wanted to repeat the order that Black Lion had given him, but it was difficult for him to do so. At this moment, he heard a ding. The elevator arrived. Almost at the same time, he also clearly felt his lips and teeth close. His tongue pressed against the roof of his mouth, causing air to rush into his nostrils, and he let out a heavy grunt. Tool man number one's head turned forward again. It had nothing to do with his own will. He saw that the elevator doors slid open, and there were already people waiting outside. There were 5 of them, both men and women. Standing in the middle was a surprisingly young man. They didn't make way, nor did they want to enter. However, their eyes were focused on the colleague beside him. To be precise, they were looking at the notebook in the colleague's hand. Tool man number one's mind had been crushed by the continuous invisible dominating power. He had almost lost his ability to think normally. He could only mechanically observe and reflect the situation around him. Or perhaps, he was just observing on his behalf. At this time, the colleague beside him raised his head. Through his sunglasses, he met face to face with the people outside the elevator. His hands were still in the position of flipping the pages. After half a second, he opened his mouth as calmly as usual. "Can you watch a bit longer? Do you want to watch a bit longer?" The subwoofer of the colleague and the voice of the young man in the middle of the 5 seemed to coincide together. Both sides probably didn't expect such a coincidence. The air froze for a moment, and it was still the young man who took the lead. He moved slightly to the side, making way for the outside passage. "You're here, right? Please help yourself." The colleague bowed slightly to the person outside the door. "Many thanks. Mr. Luonan. Nice to meet you." He walked out of the elevator in a very natural manner. Tool man number one followed him like a walking corpse. He actually observed that the gaze of the young man, Luonan, had a clear pause on his own face. At this time, a middle-aged man wearing a flowery shirt and shorts chuckled. "Brother Gu, you dumped your boss again." The colleague slightly raised his eyes and nodded toward the flowery shirt middle-aged man. "Hello, Mr. Blood Demon. I don't have any missions for now." Blood Demon introduced the young man, Luonan. "His name is Gu. He's the most carefree security personnel in the world. He leads his employer and runs all over the world." "Oh, right. He's been employed by Wang Yu for many years. If there's a conflict, you must be careful of him." "Oh, is that so?" Luonan's gaze moved away from Toolman number one's face and turned to look at Gu. Right now, he was like a young man truly driven by curiosity. Though he agreed to 2GE's request to borrow the notebook, he quickly walked over to 2GE's side. He stood shoulder to shoulder with Gu and they watched together. Of course, Luonan was at most 170 centimeters tall. 2GE's physique was robust, over 190 centimeters. There was a clear difference in height between the two. Therefore, Luonan simply left the ground with his toes and floated in the air. He was like a ghost floating behind 2GE's shoulder. Blood Demon clicked his tongue twice. This method of borrowing is passable, unlike some people. Toolman number one saw Blood Demon and the short-haired beauty turn their gazes in his direction. He subconsciously felt a bit dizzy as he faced those dim yellow and bright eyes. His mouth began to squirm again at this time, producing a sound. It's hard to say who's borrowing who. You're tuning into the Journey of the Soul YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.